story about that ZCon at Las Vegas. It was the first one after COVID. And so it was finally like amazing to see people face to face again. I hadn't even seen like Zuko or Jack at all, for years at that point. And it was just so heartening to see my friends again and people who are working on these important technologies. But it was also important and extraordinary because it was finally, during, like, I think, to see people second day again of that conference that a part of the U.S. government, the Office of Foreign Asset Controls, which we call OFAC, which is a division of the U.S. Treasury, announced that Tornado Cash, and they weren't very specific, they just said Tornado Cash, is a sanctioned entity. And therefore, Americans are no longer allowed to use Tornado Cash. I'm fairly certain that everyone in the audience will know what Tornado Cash is, but I'll briefly just say it. It is a smart contract-based application on the Ethereum blockchain that uses the very same zero-knowledge cryptography developed for Zcash in order to create privacy functionality on Ethereum for people who want to escape the tyranny of a sort of constant public ledger of all of your financial transactions that your nosy next door neighbor can look at, and that so can anyone else, with or without a warrant, with or without suspicion of a crime, with or without any good reason to know the details of your financial life. And so Tornado Cash to me is an important project. It was an attempt at bringing the technologies that we developed here in Zcash to a chain that has computation, the ability to make custom assets, and obviously also to the second largest chain, I believe, by market capitalization of all the cryptocurrencies. And sanctioning Tornado Cash was an extraordinary measure. And I'll get into that as we go through my talk today. It's also an important thing to know a lot about and keep in mind, because if they can sanction Tornado Cash, there's a very real argument. I don't think it's a good argument, but there's a very real argument that they could try and sanction the Zcash protocol as a whole. There's not too many differences. I mean, Zcash is a layer 1, and it is the cumulative work of all the people running the software and connecting with each other on a peer-to-peer network that makes that service work. Tornado Cash is a decentralized app on Ethereum, and it is the cumulative effort of all the people running the Ethereum protocol that makes that work. But the Ethereum protocol writ large doesn't do what Tornado Cash does. It's just this discrete series of named smart contract addresses that do what Tornado Cash does. So there's a somewhat easier way to sanction a discrete series of smart contract addresses, the Tornado Cash pool addresses, than to just say the Zcash protocol in the abstract. But if you carefully listen to what the government says when it argues in favor of sanctions against Tornado Cash, what it's saying is we can basically sanction any series of intellectual properties that are being used by people to do things that we don't want them to do, like to protect their privacy. So this is both interesting to me. I'm trained as a lawyer, and I am a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer, dear listener, however many of you there are. I wish I could see you. So do not rely on anything I say as legal advice. I am not representing you, and this is a talk for information purposes so we can better understand as a community what the public policy landscape looks like. But I am a lawyer. I work at Coin Center, where we advocate for our mission, which is to defend the freedom to innovate. And so the sanctions were interesting and sort of activating for me, because it was a huge legal question that was being developed that would have big ramifications for the technologies that I'm sort of sworn to defend. It's also, though, very important, even if you're not an egghead lawyer like me, if you're an egghead software developer or something like that, even if you're not working on Tornado Cash, because these precedents that will be set in the cases I'm about to describe, and with regard to the Tornado Cash sanctions starting last 2022, will potentially be binding on you. So to the extent someone is accused today of conspiracy to violate sanctions by virtue of writing Tornado Cash software, it is not unfathomable, and it might even be alarmingly possible that somebody could be accused of violating conspiracy to violate sanctions for developing Zcash software. So with that as sort of throat clearing, like why am I here? I'll just kind of go through my presentation. I want to invite all of you who are listening to be really active. If you have even a notion of a question, and certainly if you have a firmly formed question in your mind, please put it into the chat, because I want to make this in many ways an update on what's happened since my talk at Las Vegas and the announcement of the sanctions against Tornado Cash. And I want this to be sort of a community forum where people can, get the answers to their uncertainties about what's going to happen next and what are the implications. So please be active and put your questions under your session on WOVA. WOVA? WOVA? WOVA. Okay, so first of all, what are sanctions laws? I want to give just a very brief, for information purposes, background on what we're talking about. Sanctions laws, all different countries have sanctions laws. I'm going to be talking about US sanctions laws, specifically the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which I'll call IEEPA, IEEPA. And you might say, and you'd be right, well, this is an international community. Why are you focused on US sanctions laws? Well, for one, it's US sanctions laws that are being used to target software development of zero-knowledge proof tech. So already this is sort of something larger than a parochial US interest. But second, not being a US person or not residing in the US doesn't mean you're safe here, sadly. In fact, there's recently, I think you can Google it, the liability for sanctions internationally tri-seal report or tri-seal announcement. Tri-seal meaning 3 different agencies, as DOJ, Treasury, and a third. I'm not actually sure. I just found this the other day. There's a whole report about how it's not specific to crypto, about how sanctions apply in many cases. Liability for sanctions, failure to obey sanctions, applies to non-US persons in a lot of contexts. And one of the big contexts is when somebody is helping an American violate sanctions law in any way, effectively. There's a little bit more legal language in the Tri-Seal Declaration that was issued, but that's what it boils down to. And so even though I'm talking primarily, well, exclusively about US sanctions in this talk, this is definitely something that it doesn't matter if you're a US person or if you visit the US, even if you just stay in, say, Singapore all the time, it's still relevant to you because of the so-called long arm of US jurisdiction. Great, I've already got a question. Are there resources for developers to try to mitigate the risk of merely participating in a privacy-preserving protocol? I'd like to think of this talk as a valuable information resource, but I have to have this disclosure because we're talking about really serious things. You should probably have a lawyer. You should definitely have a lawyer if you're actively engaged in any kind of like heavy duty maintenance of a protocol that does these things. I wish that wasn't the case, because I think, especially in the US, but also in other nations that are quote unquote open societies, you have a right to publish software without prior restraint. And as long as you're not advocating for people to use that software to break the law, which I suspect nobody here is doing, that right is pretty like rock solid. Unfortunately, if you look at the case right now that's being brought against the Tornado Cash developers in the Southern District of New York, which I'll go through in this talk, the government doesn't seem to agree with those First Amendment arguments, and basically says that simply by publishing software to GitHub repositories and paying for Amazon Web Services, a place to host a user interface, which is still software, and we're at pains to remind the government about that, you are somehow on the hook potentially for conspiracy to violate sanctions laws. So this is pretty real and pretty heavy duty. And so if you're doing things like hosting content, hosting software, like paying for AWS, you should definitely have a lawyer. And if you are just, publishing your own, pull requests or updates to repositories that are involved in the protocol or wallets or things like that, unfortunately, you still should probably talk to a lawyer about your risk exposure. And I know lawyers are expensive. I work at a nonprofit, and I'm expensive even on nonprofit price levels, and I know that the private sector is a lot more expensive. So I wish I had something better to tell you, but the best resource for you if you're actively involved in maintaining these technologies is a lawyer who is your lawyer. So you need to be in a representation type relationship with that person. I can't tell you to rely on the statements I'm giving in this talk. This is more about just getting the community to know, where we all stand with regards to the legal risks here in general. Your specific legal risks you need to discuss with somebody who is duty bound to represent your interests. And this is a lot of work for more lawyers. I swear I'm not just, a member of the legal bar who's trying to get all of my friends rich or something. I wish this wasn't happening, but it is. So the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, which is US sanctions laws. Under that statute from Congress, which goes back decades, it actually goes back about a century. It was started off as the Trading with the Enemy Act, a little bit more aggressive sounding. Historically, it was a wartime power, trading with the enemy, and then it became an emergency power, International Emergency Economic Powers Act, that the president is able to use to affect important foreign policy objectives. It's supposed to be about foreign policy. It's not supposed to be about domestic policy, like telling Americans which technologies they can and cannot use. And that's one of many reasons why it's being abused in the tornado cash context. Under IEPA, the president, through the Treasury Secretary, who can also delegate this power further within the Treasury agency to the head of the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, they promulgate a list. We call it the SDN list, the Specially Designated Nationals list of people and property of those people. And basically, in the simple and more benign and probably good use of these sanctions powers, OFAC will add to that list the name of a known terrorist, say Osama bin Laden, who, now that I bring it up, I've never checked if Osama bin Laden was on the OFAC list by name, but I'm pretty sure he almost certainly was. And what that means is if your name is on the list or the properties that you own, so say he owned a cave in Afghanistan that had an address, if your name or your addresses are on that list, Americans are bound by law to not engage in financial transactions, in any transactions really, with that named person or the property of that named person. And this list has grown extensively over the century or so that sanctions have been a power that the president has. And in many ways, just summarized, to avoid going through a whole dissertation of the history of sanctions power, it's become probably the primary tool for geopolitical control that the US exerts internationally. And this is for obvious reasons, because the alternative, conventional warfare, and certainly nuclear warfare, is incredibly costly in lives and in potential, world destruction in the case of nuclear warfare. And so, given that reality, the usage of the tool to systematically blockade and starve the economy of our enemies through sanctions is the power that we have and the power that we use. So these are really serious laws. And when used well, I won't necessarily defend them, because unfortunately, I think, and this is a whole nother subtopic, the people harmed by sanctions in a country, in a sanctioned country, tend to be the poorer people, the disenfranchised people who just, their livelihoods are already on the edge. And now, because their economy is under sanction, they're going to make even less money and have even less money to feed their families and things like that. So it's still a really aggressive policy. And there's a lot of good questions to be asked about whether the leaders actually suffer that much, because they can usually find ways through these blockades, if you will, and still, enjoy their disgusting expropriation of wealth from their populations, their palaces, and their fast cars and yachts and things. That said, it's certainly true that if Russian oligarchs are going to buy boats off the backs of their oppressed people, we should be able to seize and block those luxury yacht transactions. Like, I do think there's a place for sanctions when used appropriately. So, what are the limits of sanctions laws? Sanctions laws described generally are you curate this list, and Americans are not allowed to engage in transactions with people or property on that list. The limits to sanctions laws are another category of laws that generally are referred to as the Berman Amendments, Berman, named after Howard Berman, who was the California Democrat in Congress who pushed for these amendments to sanctions laws, and a subsequent law called the Free Trade in Ideas Act. The Berman Amendments and the Free Trade in Ideas Act were a response from Congress to how the president was using sanctions laws. Congress didn't come out and say, we don't like sanctions laws, get rid of them. Congress came out and said, we're worried that America is an open society. We're not worried about that. We like that. And we're worried that the president is using, or rather abusing, these sanction powers to effectively close off our society, to say that Americans can't buy art or magazines or read books by Cuban authors, a sanctioned country, or by Iranian authors. And sanctions are supposed to harm the foreign regime that is hurting its people and starve it of resources. Sanctions are not supposed to shut down the free exchange of ideas and information and cut off Americans from access to those important ideas, even if those ideas are bad. Doing that would effectively mean that sanctions violate our First Amendment rights to freely exchange information and buy and sell information as well. This isn't just like nonprofit pamphlets and things. This is broadcasts of sporting events happening in Cuba are some of the formative cases here, very profitable broadcasts. And so Howard Berman and the other members of Congress who passed these amendments and laws said, we need to clearly circumscribe the sanction powers and forbid the president from directly or indirectly prohibiting Americans from engaging in information transactions. And the reason why there's two laws here, the Berman Amendments and then the Free Trade and Ideas Act, is because the first time we did this, the president still, or rather the Secretary of Treasury and OFAC under them, they still kept sanctioning information. And they got around this congressional prohibition on those kinds of sanctions by saying, oh, well, you identified photographs and books and lithographs, but this is a radio broadcast. It's different. And so Congress had to come back in the FTIA, the Free Trade and Ideas Act, and say, we mean you cannot prohibit any information transactions, regardless of the medium or type of information. Like we're not playing around here. Stop trying to continue to violate their First Amendment rights. We're gonna buttress those First Amendment rights for Americans by passing this further law, the Free Trade and Ideas Act. And you couldn't ask for a clearer title as to what the law is supposed to be doing. I'm going to pause here and look at this question. I've seen online comments from some influential Ethereum developers saying they felt that Zcash leadership was dismissive and unsupportive of Tornado Cash devs. Have you received that feedback yourself? What can we do as a community to defend ourselves and other developers? This is a touchy one. I've seen some of these fights. I think there is a little bit of too much aggression probably on both sides, some of the Ethereum devs and some of the Zcash devs, over the privacy pools proposal that Amin and Vitalik and others have put forward. So to not go into too much detail about that, the way I see the debate is this important question about whether, you should have a right to privacy no matter what, or whether a social graph can exclude you from their anonymity set, and therefore, in some ways, by sort of voting with their feet, deny you privacy. Because that is a way of thinking of privacy pools. Privacy pools work very much like Tornado Cash, except because of the amazing capabilities of zero knowledge proofs, individual people, before putting their funds in the pool, can basically choose who they want to be in the pool with them, to be in the anonymity set with them, and who they don't want in the anonymity set. The idea being that if there was an obvious address joining the anonymity set that had hacked a bunch of DeFi projects and was highly likely to be a North Korean cyber intelligence unit trying to launder those hacks and finance a nuclear weapons program, I should be able to not mix with those people, if you will. Again, it's not mixing. And every time I say that, I know I'm giving fodder to our enemies who say, oh, it's a mixer, all the funds are commingled. Well, no, in zero knowledge proof systems, you get the funds you put in and you're not allowed to get anything else. That's neither here nor there. But that is to say that there is a hard question here, right? And I think it's a very important and very good question to have vigorous debate about. And I lament the fact that sometimes those debates online, because this is the way the online works, which is why I'm particularly sad we're not having an in-person conference, although I think it's the right choice given travel constraints and budget issues and things like that. But some of those debates online have spilled over into sort of more personal attacks. And I think it might be the animosity surrounding those debates that is being portrayed by some or interpreted as some as Zcash folks being dismissive of the Tornado Cash devs. I, for one, I don't know the Tornado Cash devs personally. Coin Center has filed an amicus brief in the court case against Roman Storm in the Southern District of New York and Roman Semenov. And in our amicus, we make, I think, the most vigorous arguments we can possibly make that the government is horribly abusing its prosecutorial powers here and wrongly accusing these developers of crimes that they didn't commit. And so personally, I'm trying to do everything I can to help Roman Storm, at least, because I know US law. Alexei Perksev, who is being prosecuted in the Netherlands, I would like to offer my assistance as well, although I don't want to mess things up. I don't know Dutch law. It's a very different area of law, so I'm limited to how much I can help, but I feel solidarity with him. He was kept in jail for months without charges, which in the US would be a scandal. You're not allowed to hold people that long without charging them. Anyway, so that gets to that sort of community to community aid and sometimes animosity. We all have very strong opinions. And I just would put out a general call that hopefully we can stay as civil as possible and realize when we have common interests. And with regard to Tornado Cash, Zcash and Ethereum have 100% common interests. With regard to like what Ethereum devs want to build next, whether it's privacy pools or some other iteration of Tornado Cash, maybe we don't have always the same opinion, but we can have civil discussions about that and hopefully maintain our solidarity on the things that really matter. I'm going to go to the next question because this is going well. In April 2021, OFAC sanctioned a Zcash address they claim belonged to Russian entities alleged to have interfered with US elections. I'm not aware of that. That's very interesting. I'm going to look that up now. Could a miner who included a transaction to or from that address in the Zcash block be persecuted for sanctions violations? If you are that miner, dear friend who has submitted a comment here, you should find a lawyer and do not rely on the statements I'm about to say. However, for information purposes, talking generally about miners and sanctions. And I actually had a section of my talk where I wanted to discuss this, so this is perfect. Zcash is an interesting protocol with regards to miners and their compliance obligations. So we have transparent addresses, T addresses, and we have shielded addresses, Z addresses. And this might be an important area for me to get clarification from one of the actual developers of the protocol, because I'm a lawyer, not a software developer, though I think I understand these technologies quite well. For a lawyer, it's like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. transparent addresses, you know, the mining validation of transactions in order to create the block is, I suspect, very similar, if not identical, because we're a fork of Bitcoin to Bitcoin, right? And so when you make your block header, you choose which transactions from T addresses you're putting in the block. So if that sanctioned address is a T address, you, if you were a miner, would be able to go to the SDN list, which is the sanctions list, and periodically download it and check to see if there's any T addresses on that list. And as you do your work as a miner, whenever you build block headings, you just never put in any transactions from that address. Are you obligated to do that under US law? Well, the first question is, are you a US person or not a US person? This is not a decisive question because, as I said, this Tri-Seal declaration has recently sort of pushed the issue of how broad is US jurisdiction over this issue to the fore. And there's a lot of arguable points there. Someone might say, well, you just don't have jurisdiction over me. I'm a German national doing my own business. Everything I do complies with German law. What the hell, America? Stay away from me. I'm just mining a blockchain. But you might lose on that. I don't know. Depends on how strong this extraterritorial jurisdiction is in the context of assisting Americans to violate sanctions laws, which is how they're going to argue your activities fit into their jurisdiction. If you are an American, you should definitely have a lawyer, and not just any lawyer, a lawyer that specializes in sanctions. I would, if I was that lawyer, advise you to block those transactions. And what we're finding with Bitcoin miners in the US generally is that seems to be like serious Bitcoin miners who are based in the US seem to be getting that advice from their lawyers, because what we're seeing is pretty systematic non-inclusion of sanctioned addresses within the Bitcoin block headers. And I have trouble arguing for any other outcome. And this is a big part of the reason why I think it's a big problem for blockchains to have base layer publicity, to not have base layer privacy. Because if these technologies are supposed to be neutral infrastructure, which is not illegal to build, it is not illegal to build neutral infrastructure for people to use for good things that they want to do with their lives. You don't have to spy on people in order to build a financial system if you're not actually a trusted entity in that financial system. And that's a huge, I mean, and if somebody wants to argue that I'm condoning illegal activity by arguing for building neutral financial systems, then I want them to bring a prosecution against me, because that's deeply cynical, totalitarian, and it goes against everything I believe America stands for, and I'm actually pretty patriotic about my country. So that's the reality with mining and public blockchains. Now, things are more interesting with Zcash and Monero and some of the other L1s that have privacy features, in that it may be impossible to do that with regard to shielded transactions. And that's a protocol intensive question. Like I'm not going to stretch my knowledge to say that it's impossible to do it, but that's kind of the point, is that these transactions don't leave a public they'll leave a public trace, aside from the validity of the transaction being something you can check because of the zero knowledge proof. And again, it's not illegal. It's not a crime to build neutral public infrastructure for people to use for their own legitimate purposes. And so it shouldn't also be a crime to run that infrastructure like a miner who's validating shielded pool transactions is doing, even if they have no ability to know the salient details of those transactions. So that's me on mining. And to some extent, I will say this is a real advantage of Zcash in our future information and public policy landscape. I think it's quite possible that as sanctions become increasingly used and sometimes abused by national authorities, that the Bitcoin blockchain will basically, its throughput will be continually reduced. And I'm not saying, oh, what a shame that Bitcoin miners in America can't process a terrorist's transactions and put them in the blockchain. I'm not saying that. I am saying that what if you had liability under Chinese laws for processing the transactions of dissidents in Western China, Uyghurs who are just trying to get money out of the country to their families who have already left to avoid losing their cultural heritage? that is a transaction that a miner in China should put in the blockchain, even though it probably violates Chinese laws. And that's a transaction that hopefully an American miner would put in the blockchain, even if the US government happened to develop a friendlier relationship with China than we currently have and say Americans shouldn't process these transactions for Uyghurs either. It's like, how dare you? Anyway, mining. Okay, I've got another question. A significant portion of the indictment. So this indictment is the questioner is asking, I think, about the Tornado Cash indictment against Roman Storm and Roman Semenov, which came around, gosh, half a year ago now. So a while after the sanctions came in place, the US government, which had originally said in those sanctions, we are not sanctioning any of the developers of the protocol or the members of the Torn Token DAO or the users of the protocol. We are just sanctioning the protocol. But then subsequently, they came back and said, all right, not only are we, well, they're sanctioning one of them, the non-US person. They're not sanctioning Roman Storm because it's illegal to use US sanction laws to sanction a US person because it would be a deprivation of due process rights. You'd be accusing them of a crime effectively and punishing them, blocking them from engaging in financial transactions with other Americans without a trial. And that's why it's manifestly unconstitutional for the US to use sanction powers to sanction American citizens and US residents. And it's kind of an insidious aspect of sanctions law that works. We seem to be perfectly fine doing these very aggressive things to foreign persons without a trial, but we won't do it to our own citizens without a trial. But that's neither here nor there. So a significant portion of the indictment, oh, sorry, I was describing the indictment. I tend to go off in a lot of tangents. So they sanctioned Semenov, who's, I believe, a Russian national. They didn't sanction Roman Storm, but they accused both and co-conspirators who are not named, but almost certainly are Alexei Perksov, who's already being tried at this point in the Netherlands. They accused the two Romans of conspiracy to launder money, conspiracy to do unlicensed money transmission, and conspiracy to violate sanctions laws. So they're not sanctioned themselves, although Semenov is separately, but they're helping people violate sanctions laws. So a significant portion of that indictment that made those accusations was focused on the fact that Tornado Cash founders were profiting via Torn tokens. If the founders had been completely anon and not run the UI, additional services, how do you think that would have affected the strength of the charges? There's some interesting sort of divergent factual questions there. I want to come out and say that I don't believe that being anonymous is a good way to protect yourself as a developer. I understand the desire to be anonymous, but you shouldn't have to be anonymous to be in a country that obeys the rule of law and fundamental human rights and publish software. You should be able to be yourself 100%, whoever you are, whatever your beliefs, prejudices, religion, gender identity, you should just be able to be that and publish software. Because if you're not doing other things, if you're not advocating for the criminal usage of that software, you're creating research, you're creating science and technology that has ubiquitous applications, the vast majority of which are good for human flourishing. And if we think that the only people who should be allowed to do that are people who hide in the shadows, then we're fucked as a country. So being anon might be a pragmatic way to keep doing these things in a hostile regulatory environment, but it's messed up. It goes against all the things I believe America should stand for. And it doesn't mean that somehow you're not potentially guilty of crimes if the government thinks you're guilty of crimes. And if anything, it's going to make it easier for the government in some ways, if they do catch you, to prove that you were guilty of crimes, because there will be this perception that, oh, well, if they were doing nothing wrong, they wouldn't have hid in the shadows. But look, they took all these steps to hide their activity from the government. So clearly they must have been doing something wrong, right? Even if they weren't doing anything wrong. That's what they're going to argue. And so much more important than being anon or not being anon is, what are you doing? In this country, in the US, I firmly believe that if all you're doing is publishing open source software that anybody is free to use for any purpose, and it's infrastructure software, it creates neutral private financial infrastructure, I think you have a watertight First Amendment defense. Again, you should talk to your own lawyer if you want to rely on that statement. But if that's not what the First Amendment stands for, then we're in big trouble as a country, because the world is run by software. And if people can't just write software that does certain things because it's their deeply held beliefs that software should do those things, then people are just not going to engage in the productive and technological and socially beneficial activity of building new things in the world. And that's sort of the end of progress, the exchange of ideas and freedom. Now, the question also mentions a lot of the indictment is focused on the fact that TC founders were profiting via torn tokens. And you're right. There's various reasons for that in the indictment and in the motions that have been submitted by the government to support its indictment. The biggest reason for that is not the sanctions charge. It's the unlicensed money transmission charge. And I won't go into a whole description of unlicensed money transmission here, but the definition of money transmission, for which you then need to get a license before you do it, says engages as a business in transferring currency or currency substitutes from one location to another or one person to another. And so profitability definitely informs whether you're engaged in this activity as a business or not. That said, with regard to the unlicensed money transmission charge, I think the government's wrong, because FinCEN, the relevant regulator for licensing money transmission, has said since 2013, at least, that you need to actually accept and transmit something on behalf of another, which means controlling it, at least for a transient point in time. And that if you actually have no control over the assets that the software you've designed is moving, then you can't be a money transmitter. So set that aside. The sanctions charges and profiting from torn tokens. Also, by the way, the price of torn tokens plummeted like eightfold, I think, as it became clear that North Korea was using Tornado Cash, or was probably using Tornado Cash. We don't know for certain. I think that the Lazarus Group is North Korea, though we're pretty sure they are. And so it's pretty clear they didn't profit off of the use of their protocol by sanctioned persons. It's pretty clear that they actually lost tons of money because the protocol stopped being used as much. No matter what, the torn token price was just deplorable, and so it's a question whether they even profited. That said, sanctions laws exempt information transactions. This was my description of the Berman Amendments. And it's very clear in the Berman Amendments and the Free Trade and Ideas Act that Congress meant to forbid the president and the executive branch from sanctioning transactions in information, commercial or non-commercial. And that's actually in the statute. So it doesn't, you're allowed to make money off of these information transactions, as long as they're just information transactions. There's a harder question whether all of the things you're doing as a software developer are information, and whether you're actually engaged in conduct, like regulatable conduct, like helping people do things by knowing them, knowing their particular needs and satisfying their needs. And especially if that person you're helping is a criminal, then there's a very real possibility that you're not just publishing software, you're engaged in person-to-person conduct to facilitate an illegal end or, say, sanctions evasion. But that's not what's alleged in the indictment. They basically say just publishing the Tornado Cash protocol to the GitHub repository and running the software on an AWS server is itself conduct that we can regulate, and goes beyond information transactions. So I think that's why there is this focus on the profitability of torn tokens, which was actually not profitable, is the unlicensed money transmission claim. It could come up in the sanctions discussion, although, as I said, the Free Trade and Ideas Act and the Berman Amendments, they don't discriminate. If it's an information transaction, it doesn't matter if you're doing it for profit or non-profit. Got another question. At what level of contributing software to the Zcash community should a developer think seriously about retaining a lawyer? Developing a wallet, working on shared libraries, hosting a Zcash node, or light wallet server? I'm going to give an unsatisfying answer. I want you all to check in with a lawyer, because I don't want anyone hurt here. And frankly, if you're doing some of those lightweight things, those things that we think are not like a heavy level of contributing to the Zcash community, you're a great case to vindicate rights, right? It's like, are you serious? all I do is contribute to a widely used shared software library that is used in Zcash, but is also used in like NSA grade encryption for the government. Like, are you serious? You're going to come at me? Those kinds of plaintiffs are, I think, important, or those kinds of people are important to vindicate our rights if it ever came to it. Now, you might not be at a high likelihood of being prosecuted because the government doesn't want to prosecute people that it thinks it will lose its prosecution against. But there may be an opportunity for you to apply for declarative judgment, which is something you could talk with a lawyer about in your home jurisdiction. Say, like, we see what's happening in the SDNY. I want to know that I'm not doing something that's a crime. And I think I can sue the government to vindicate my rights. So that's another reason to talk to a lawyer, even if you don't think there's a likelihood of prosecution against you. From your perspective, it will be better for Zcash to get rid of transparent transaction. No, I don't think so. I think it provides flexibility, acknowledging that there are view keys, so you can basically get the effect of a transparent transaction with view keys. I do think that transparent addresses afford heavily regulated entities really obvious and clear compliance steps that they've already learned in the context of Bitcoin. And so if we deprecated those addresses, it's possible that it'd be impossible to find a regulated entity that would transact in Zcash, which would cut off a lot of on and off ramps to this important technology for financial privacy. So that's my personal opinion. I don't feel very strongly about that because, as I said, you could affect something similar with view keys, although query whether heavily regulated institutions would spend the time and money to build a compliance program around view keys when they already had one about transparent addresses. But that's my general opinion on that. I don't think that it creates particularly strong public policy ramifications one way or the other. It's not like this miners censoring transaction address issue is deadly to the protocol. It might be to protocols like Bitcoin that only have transparent addresses. Although that's a big thing to say because Bitcoin, I like Bitcoin. I'm not saying something mean about Bitcoin. It's the original community and the biggest community by far from a cryptocurrency standpoint. So they're probably pretty resilient, right? The fact that US persons and presumably entities may not be sanctioned seems important given that ECC and ZF are US entities. Yes. This is one reason why when I think it was Andrew Miller who first approached me about joining the Zcash Foundation as a board member, I was like, I don't do this. As I said, I'm an advisor for Starkware. My day job, my main job is Coin Center, public policy. I don't go out and, join a lot of boards and do a lot of, contract work in the cryptocurrency space because I'm risk averse. And I think it's important to pick the right things that you want to champion with your finite time on this earth, right? And so one of my main certainties when Andrew Miller came to me about how I would or would not do this was I'm only going to do this if it's a US based nonprofit dedicated to publishing software for financial privacy. Because yes, that means that if they tried to sanction the Zcash Foundation, they'd be sanctioning a wholly owned nonprofit US organization with all of the constitutional rights that accompany being that US resident organization and nonprofit for that matter. And so we could say, like, there's no due process here. You didn't accuse this organization of criminal behavior. You can't just put us on a list that forbids Americans from transacting with us. We have to go to a trial, have a judge, a neutral magistrate, a process of appeal, representation by counsel, Sixth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Fourth Amendment issues are at stake. First Amendment issues are hugely at stake, our freedom of speech. Because what do? We publish software that express our deeply held viewpoints that privacy and financial infrastructure neutrality matter. And so, yes, it is important that some of the entities in this space are US entities, I think, because not just because that changes whether or not they can be sanctioned. I think it also changes what kind of arguments they can make if accused of sanctions violations or if accused of money laundering, we can make these First Amendment arguments and say, take a hike. The US Constitution says that my rights here are robust. Do you think governments might increase their regulatory pressure to levels that might see Zcash wallets removed from app stores? And if that happens, what would be the path to follow? This question reminds me of another question, so I'll address both of them. I think you get pressure to remove Zcash wallets from app stores, and you get pressure to delist Zcash on cryptocurrency exchanges and other centralized financial institution platforms. I don't want to see this happen. I think America and freedom and the things that I like in the world, I think my kids will be better off if Americans are given a choice about their financial privacy, and that choice isn't forced upon them by exerting pressure on a choke point, a big corporation who cares about the profitability of their business more than the rights of the users that it services. So I'm not defending that. But at the same time, if the electronic cash for the internet that we're building still relies on choke points, we haven't built the right electronic cash. And so what happens? My guess is we struggle because normal users expect to be able to get access to these things through the comfortable mechanisms like app stores and banks that they've used in the past. And it's going to be hard to get users to use something even more decentralized. But what would be the path to follow? The path is to further decentralize. Like, again, if your electronic cash relies on corporate choke points, you built the wrong electronic cash in some way. Cool. Got 10 minutes left. I might end it there and give you back your time if you don't have more questions, because I think we've covered a lot. Great. Got a question. What about your thoughts on the new exchange address type made for Binance? What are your thoughts on this, and what do you think of its adequacy? I'm from Firo, who proposed these addresses, and we are seeing restrictions being lifted from Binance on the 4 European countries we were originally banned in. I understand you're not an EU lawyer, but just from your gut feeling and understanding on MiCA. Oh no, I asked for another question, and I'm afraid I don't know enough about either the exchange addresses at Binance or MiCA to give a good answer here, and I don't want to send you down the wrong path. Okay, next question. There is strong support for forced inclusion lists, EIP 7547, in the upcoming Ethereum upgrade. The rationale is it would give block builders plausible deniability for including sanctioned transactions, since excluding them would prevent the creation of valid blocks. This seems to distribute the regulatory risk across the whole Ethereum validator network, wondering what the legal implications are. That's very interesting. In general, I think we need more approaches like 7547. I think we should be having more serious conversations in the public blockchain space about encrypting the mempool. Now, maybe I've said something foolish and Dara or somebody is going to tell me that you can't do that without encrypting everything like Zcash. But we need better answers to this, because base layer neutrality is sort of the assumed nature of blockchain networks, and without base layer neutrality, I'm not sure they're all that valuable as compared to a more permissioned financial system. I think the counter argument to finding ways to protect base layer neutrality by spreading the sort of regulatory surface area and creating quote unquote plausible deniability. The counter argument is, well, we just need at least a few jurisdictions around the world to remain open and liberal, and miners will hopefully in those jurisdictions continue to process transactions that have been wrongly blocked by oppressive authorities in other regions, and that will find an equilibrium. And I hope that's true. I think that's what supporters of Bitcoin, even in light of the ramping up of sanctions, would say. I think that's a geopolitical incentive-based solution rather than a cryptographic solution. And cryptographic solutions seem to carry less possibility of failure than sort of geopolitical incentives or balancing type solutions to this problem. Also, I want to say one thing from, again, if you're a miner and you worry about these things, or a staker on Ethereum, if you're any kind of block validator, you should definitely have a lawyer, because you're engaged in probably some at least reasonably profitable activity, and you should use some of those profits to pay a lawyer. I guess what I would say is this: talk to your lawyer about things like willful blindness. You're not allowed to, if somebody goes to you and says, "Hey man, I really want some meth, but all I got is this Bitcoin and I need dollars to buy meth. Will you give me some Bitcoin, some dollars, so I can buy some meth, and I'll give you this Bitcoin?" You cannot just stand there and go, la 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 la, I didn't hear meth, because you're still sort of culpable for that behavior. Now, obviously, this is a cartoon version of the question you're asking, because the question you're asking is much more nuanced. It's, we just mine the blocks on the protocol. The protocol sets rules. We have to follow those rules to engage in this business activity. We don't investigate, nor do we have any reason to know the details of the things we're doing to obey the protocol. If we didn't do the protocol, we would not do the mining and not get the reward. You have a much better argument that this isn't willful blindness. This is just obeying the rules of a computer system while doing information transactions, which are exempted from, plausibly are arguably exempted from IEPA, and therefore we're not culpable. All right. But this is why this is a gray area. I can't give you a firm answer here, and I'd be a bad lawyer and probably subject to disbarment if I told you that there was a clear answer here and you can rely on me. You cannot rely on me. So I'll leave it at that. So 5 minutes for my conclusion. I'll take less than that. My contact information is peter@coincenter.org. That's the email address I check most often. Coincenter.org is CoinCenter's website. All of our regulatory filings, all of our testimony in front of Congress, all of our blog posts and day-to-day updates on the state of public policy are available at coincenter.org. If this talk specifically has been interesting to you, I highly recommend you go to coincenter.org and find, it's one of our recent posts, a copy of our amicus brief in the Roman Semovich criminal prosecution, Tornado Cash prosecution. That is the document where we helped the court hopefully better understand sanctions laws, the Berman Amendment carve-outs for information transactions, and why it is wrong to try and hold Roman Storm and Semenov accountable for sanctions violations in light of the activities described in the indictment, which are pretty much limited to software development and publishing, and in light of the fact that the Berman Amendments carve out those types of transactions from the reach of sanctions prohibitions. I also want to put in a plug, if this talk is interesting to you and this aspect of sanctions law is interesting to you, to also read the excellent brief from the DeFi Education Fund in the same case, where they go into another area of sanctions laws, its past applications, to find that this is an unprecedented use of sanctions law. So that's another good legal brief to read, just to better understand the sanctions issues surrounding software development. Cool. Well, with that, I wish you all a good ZconV. Is that what we're calling it? That's something I should have known before starting this talk. And I will be in the wrap-up session, and I'm also going to be in a couple other sessions throughout the week. So thank you.
And we're live? Okay.
3, 2.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Ian Sagstetter, formerly of the Electric Coin Company and of ZCub, in various, just community member now. and we are here to record some short podcasts with various members of the Zcash community. We're calling them Zcon sessions, just some in-person recordings while we're all here together. Our first recording and guest will be Nate Wilcox from the Electric Wing Company. Nate, how are you doing today?
Great. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for taking out the time to hop on the pod. I really just wanted to cover an update on the proof of stake research. So I think for maybe the first couple minutes here, could you maybe just set the context for people who aren't familiar? Why is Zcash researching a potential move to proof of stake, and what are the motivations there?
Yeah, so ECC, my company, we think it would be a good idea for Zcash to transition to proof of stake. And the main reason that motivates us is because we believe that's a way for people to earn ZEC from block rewards that can have a better distribution than mining or other consensus protocols.
Okay.
So like our motivation is make it possible for more people to earn more of the rewards who are smaller players instead of like big
Well,
institutions.
people would argue that staking is one of the arguments I hear is that it's like a rich get richer type thing. But what would be the response to that, right? Because it's probably really hard to be a Zcash miner currently or earn Zcash via mining.
Yes. So so my response is I think any of these consensus systems are rich get richer, really.
Okay.
It's just a matter of can you like how much can you level the playing field? So there's always going to be like um, kind of an advantage people with more wealth have, but there is a difference in different protocols as to how much of an advantage that is. So the thinking, and this is kind of like uncommon or counterintuitive, is that proof of stake can level the playing field more. So in mining, it's like the biggest miners are the ones that have the sweetest deals on power, basically.
Okay.
And who has the sweetest deals on power? Probably more wealthy people, not small time miners.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think then the idea around this is to potentially level the playing field, distribute issuance more equally. What is the first step? Like, what is the first steps been taken to kind of explore this opportunity and explore this type of change? What has been
Right. So, about a year ago, when we ECC posted a blog post that we were motivated to do this, we sort of set out like a set of goals, and I gave a presentation at the last Zcon that sort of was a survey of a bunch of design issues with proof of stake protocols that are specific to Zcash. Like, what are the issues that we would care more about? And then over the past year, ECC, like basically I paused a lot of that work while we were focusing more on getting wallets working well on the Zcash blockchain because of the large transaction load.
Okay.
So we're just sort of emerging from that, and hopefully at the end of a lot of that effort, it took longer than I expected, but so now we're sort of ramping proof of stake efforts back up a little bit. So I just gave a presentation here at ZCon that was presenting like an idea. So it's like a really early design brainstorm, basically. Here's a way we could introduce proof of stake to Zcash. That's sort of the thinking is this could be like a first step that's a little more cautious. And that idea at a high level is to add a proof of stake component while keeping proof of work running.
Okay.
That's how I would describe it in a nutshell. But
So from a high level, it would allow miners to continue mining and receiving newly issued coins, but also giving Zcash holders an opportunity to stake and then receive some portion of the mining reward or fees. Like, what's the design mechanism at a high level?
Okay, so at a high level, so first of all, there's a lot of details that are just undecided or open.
Yeah, of course.
So like one thing everyone wants to know is like, okay, well, what are the staking rewards going to be? Right? That's like in my experience, a lot of users want to know that. I don't know for sure yet, but so just at a high level, one of the big challenges with this is we would need to divide the newly issued coins between, right now it's divided between dev fund and mining.
Okay.
If we're going to introduce proof of stake, we got to split that up between those
divide it
three
even more a little
and
bit.
figure out how to do that. So that's going to be, I'm sure a lot of people will have opinions about that. So assuming we figure out how that works, then for this design at a high level, the idea is proof of work keeps running normally. So miners are the ones producing blocks. But this new proof of stake layer, I call it a trailing finality layer. It's watching the blocks coming out of proof of work and then marking some of them as final.
Okay.
And final means they can't be rolled back. And the reason that is nice is that it helps some use cases. So any use case where you need to wait for a lot of confirmations could be improved. Like we cut that time down a lot.
Okay.
So the one that comes to mind first for me all the time is exchange deposits. But it's also that finality piece is like a really useful building block for some other things like cross-chain bridges that are trust minimized and which I'm excited to see built.
Because that was part of this is like one of the benefits of potentially, from my understanding of moving into a proof of stake system that kind of aligns with like Cosmos, IBC Tendermint, is that you have some form of improved interoperability. Is that a motivation of like trying to see, well, potentially with the ZSA, some assets moving to the Zcash blockchain, but additionally having ZEC live on other chains and being used in a wide variety of different applications? Is that like that's one of the main motivators, right?
That's a motivator for me. So we are not specifically looking at how to do bridging yet, but I've heard of at least 3 or so teams or projects who are interested in cross-chain bridging to Zcash. So I'm definitely reaching out to them being like, hey, if we had finality, would that help your design?
Okay.
And yes, it would help some of those. There's this funny subtlety though, because switching to do really safe bridges, what you really need is finality. You don't necessarily need proof of stake. It's just that it comes with a lot of proof of stake designs out of the box.
Okay,
so yeah,
that's an important caveat.
Yeah. So this design proposal of trailing finality is like a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake that could still bridge to other things.
Very cool. Awesome. So I guess to sum this conversation up is there's a motivation to have Zcash holders be able to participate in the receiving of like new issuance of coins. So receiving like some form of block reward or receiving rewards or fees by staking coins to the network. And that levels the playing field. It doesn't completely make it like more equal, but it levels the playing field out to normal holders versus bigger operations. And this new proof of stake proposal is around introducing like a hybrid proof of stake, proof of work matter. Okay. What, I guess my final question would be is what kind of like has inspired this model and what design choices have you been researching that have made you kind of come to this idea and present this information at the conference here?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of motivated. It's motivated by wanting to see if we can safely introduce proof of stake. So like an alternative approach would be, let's just pick a proof of stake protocol and just like switch everything to it like right at some activation height. But to me, that seems a little too like reckless because we don't know. I mean, there are plenty of existing protocols that are sort of demonstrating that they work, but there's some uncertainty about what about the actual switching method.
Hi, John.
Hi there, what's up?
Thanks for joining. Sorry about the video playing. Yeah, how are you doing?
Good, no problem.
Your sound is good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
When is the session starting? Live? Are we live?
In like, no. I
Yes,
don't
yes,
believe-
we are live. We are
Oh, yeah.
live. Yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
This is the screen share stopping means we are live. So John, can you please go? And Dan and Tanika, I can't stop the YouTube thing. So
Oh, okay.
we just have to keep going.
Well, I can go immediately then.
Yeah, go for it, John. Thank you for joining
Okay.
us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm happy the sound is okay. And I'm going to be talking about privacy and compliance. And the big question is, can we have both at the same time? It's a question that occupies my mind and many of us more and more. And I'm going to try to lay out my thoughts about it and the thoughts of the Kelly team and try to connect it to what's going on right now. If you have questions, so I didn't have time to pop out the chat, so I think I'll keep the questions for the end of the presentation. So let's jump right in. We're interested in this this contradiction. All of us as users, we deserve privacy. And when I transact on the Zcash protocol, I know what I'm doing. I am doing legitimate actions, and I should be allowed to do this with full privacy. Of course, when this feature is enabled and available for everyone, criminals could use and abuse it. And this is the focus of the tension. Added to that, the fact that I can move value around on this blockchain, the data of the transactions, this is actually financial data. And financial data is also regulated. It's private data. And there's many regulations, but the most famous one for people is GDPR in Europe, where anything that is attached to a person is immediately looked at with rights for that person. You have the right to know what your data is doing, and financial data is part of that right. It has special provisions for banks to scrutinize what you're doing, of course, but the core of it is, as legitimate users, we want to be in control of what people know about us. Now, next to that, regulated exchanges, they have a set of requirements for which they got their license. And when we want to convert ZEC to USD or go, off-ramp to fiat, we need to go through exchanges like this. So on the left, I depicted 3 such exchanges. 2 of them offer you Zcash right now. And one of them, actually the yellow one, Bits of Gold, cannot do it because of the problems of tracing the route that the assets have gone through, and local interaction with banks. So Bits of Gold is the largest crypto exchange in Israel, and banks here in Israel don't allow any crypto to be converted if they cannot have visibility on the full travel of the funds. And when we talk about ZSAs, Zcash shielded assets, which Kedit is developing, then the main application for that, or the biggest one we see, which is stablecoins, the issuers of stablecoins also need to be compliant, and they have their own set of requirements. And that set of requirements goes in conflict with not seeing what the assets have been doing on the blockchain. So on the one hand, we don't want a full trace of all transactions to be available to anyone without our consent and control as users. But on the other hand, we are interacting with these exchanges and issuers, and they have their own regulations and set of needs. Now, there's a meta problem on top of it, which is that those two communities, the community of developers and the community of, let's say, regulation enforcement, they don't see the same facts. When we develop on Zcash, we know why we're doing it, and we're seeing mostly legitimate uses. The furthest from legitimate use is if someone is saying, I don't want to care about taxes. Now, this is, of course, evading taxes is against the law. Here in this panel, you can see on the rightmost side, the IRS-CI investigator that is looking after transactions where people evade taxes and do other crimes with digital assets. But from his perspective, that's what he sees. He will primarily see the crimes, even if there's not a lot of them. That's the lens by which they see the entire ecosystem. And they're actually seeing things that the developers will never see, because as an investigator, they will have access to facts and data that us as a community we're not aware of. We don't know what the ecosystem or the systems are used for. We cannot know. That's the point of having full privacy in Zcash. So they focus on the bad uses. We know that I'm biased here, of course, but we know that we're building this for the good uses. And we're actually vocal as a community, and we should be even more vocal about the fact that we don't want bad uses of privacy on this network. But the numbers, the data is not shared. So we don't really talk the same language. What you're seeing here is an attempt to try to bridge that gap by approaching the regulators. Here, this was in Washington, and talking about this discrepancy between how they perceive the ecosystem and how we perceive it. And this is not going in a good direction currently. The last move was to put a focus on Samurai wallet and wallets that have increased privacy, sometimes referred to as mixers. These are the big change is looking at developers of software that are building these wallets and deciding that this activity of developing the software is not something that complies with the law. Now, this is I won't get into the specifics because it's fresh and there's a lot of debate and there's counter arguments that are being brought by the entire community. Was frankly shocked by the last moves. What we should pay attention to, though, is what are we trying to achieve with the software we're building? And if it's an established fact that the software main purpose is facilitating transactions that we somehow know by some fact, we know that those transactions are not legitimate, then of course, we should stop developing features that facilitate non-legitimate use of privacy. And we should certainly not encourage anyone. I'm speaking as a participant in the Zcash community. We should not encourage anyone who wants privacy to join, including those that you have a strong suspicion to believe that they would use it for clearly bad things. I don't know, no one has the whole facts about this particular case with Samurai Wallet, but I think that it puts the entire field not at ease. And I can see consequences already with ECC asking themselves, do we want to develop a wallet? Also, do we want to have dev fund payments to ECC directly from Zcash? And those questions we have to ask ourselves as a community, how do we approach this heightened tension from such moves? And I want to repeat, I believe that this is a complete misreading of what it means to develop software and what it means to run distributed projects. But I think that we have to face reality, which is that's the current spirit right now for anything that has to do with privacy. So the message needs to be clear. We need to find a way to demonstrate that the privacy that we're meaning is the legitimate type, the one that serves users to protect their financial data, and that we're not accepting in our community bad uses, and we help those actors that are in between the exchanges, the stablecoin issuers, we help them get onto this network, this ecosystem that we built, with tools that allow them to be compliant. So the big question here is, what can we do? Now, Kedit is specifically developing. I didn't introduce myself in the beginning. I'm Jonathan Wash, CEO and founder of Kedit. We are working on Zcash shielded assets, the ability to issue assets on the Zcash blockchain and move them around with full privacy. And one of the big use cases of ZSAs is stablecoins. And so because each asset that is issued is a separate thing, you can have, you de facto have an opt-in mechanism. People can decide not to use an asset if they don't like how this asset is managed and the level of privacy they get from interacting with a particular asset. On the left, you can see Bills, which is the stable coin that was announced in Israel that Kedit was also involved in, along with bits of gold. This is where we see the need for stablecoins, where we're at the forefront of this ecosystem of using blockchains for supporting payment and for supporting a wider use, with more people onboarding and discovering the ease of use of moving assets on blockchains, digital assets. And of course, the stability that is offered by the underlying asset. This is an increased benefit for those who want to get into crypto, but not with all the volatility. So it's one of the main reasons why stablecoins have such a success. The stablecoin is backed by a fiat currency that sits in a bank, and so all of the regulation that applies to the issuer, counting the amount of circulating tokens versus how much is in the bank, and issuing and redeeming the fiat and the tokens, making sure that when someone sends, let's say, dollars, there's the right amount of tokens issued, and vice versa. All of this is centralized. The issuer bears a lot of responsibility doing that. And so they need to have some recourse, because the issuers are under scrutiny from regular regulators. Right. So maybe I'll pause here if there's obvious questions. Let me check the chat for a moment. Okay, I can see an obvious question. How do you propose that bad be distinguished from good? One person's freedom fighter is another person terrorist, as the saying goes. It's interesting the choice of words. If the ability to censor or exclude exists, it will inevitably be used by the powerful against the powerless. Okay, this is a core question. So, beside the example that was picked, and I'll try to touch on that at the end, but the distinction between good and bad here is outside of the scope, because way before that distinction, there is a matter of jurisdiction. In the case of a stable coin, there's a very clear jurisdiction. That's where the issuer of the coin, the stable coin, is located, and the laws that apply to that issuer. And so we don't have the luxury of having the total freedom of a decentralized system where it's much more unclear what is the jurisdiction that applies. For the issuer of a stablecoin, they need to have tools so that they can abide by their local the local laws. And so if we want to have issuers of various countries or joining this network, we need to give tools so that they can do the work of being compliant with their regulation. And so this pushes the question of good and bad uses on the interaction between the issuer and their regulator. And it also limits the usability or the scope of what a stablecoin can do when compared to the freedom that is obtained from ZEC itself. So I'm focusing this conversation on the angle that Kedit is working on, which is ZSAs and assets on Zcash. And so what we're proposing is a set of, let's say, compliance-friendly functionality. The goal of this is to make it possible for issuers to join the ecosystem and to use the advanced techniques and tools that exist on Zcash, which would make the stablecoin the most advanced form of payment that exists, but still be able to comply with the regulation that falls on an issuer. So to be more specific, there's features related to encrypting the data so that only the issuer can have a look at the data. So in a way, relinquishing, however that's pronounced, the control of your private data for that specific asset. And by choice, when you're using this asset, you're saying, I understand that the issuer is actually able to see where this asset is moving. So this is a very limited form of privacy as compared to the full privacy that you would get from moving ZEC around. But it does allow all these uses of transfer of value where everybody else on the network cannot see the source and the amounts of the transactions. So this is done with verifiable encryption. It's very interesting technologically speaking, but it's also a very innovative way to approach stablecoin issuance on such an advanced system as Zcash. This hasn't been done in the past, and it introduces a new work point for stablecoins and the question of how do you deal with the burden of this data now that the data is not available for everyone, but only for the issuer. There's very interesting questions there. The other smaller, let's say, features are standardizing a way to add identity on the memo of the transaction. And of course, this is again opt-in. You decide how you which asset you want to interact with, and if that asset allows it, you can put a form of a derivation of your identity in the memo, so that when you interact with exchanges, you can demonstrate that those funds that you just sent are yours, and answer questions, let's say compliance questions from exchanges with cryptographic proof of your answers, as opposed to revealing everything as is done with transparent blockchains. So this is an important one, and there's actually changes in the memo field that support that. And another feature is the ability to refuse a transaction. So if you don't know where funds came from, or if you need to do verifications until you finally can accept and make final a transaction, there's we require a feature of refusing transactions, or the opposite, actively accepting transactions. This is useful for payment systems where you get a notification that you got paid, but you might decide that either it's the wrong payment, or you refuse to accept the payment for various reasons. Now, there's a lot of open research questions that would move these features in a more subtle direction, where we would have maybe transparency on when the financial data is used at the issuer, maybe even separating who can see this private data. You could have the issuer and a viewer on behalf of the issuer, and have that viewer see the data and not tie directly to the issuer. The amount of data that they could see could be throttled. So limiting how much, and as I said in the first bullet, also revealing how often was it scrutinized, the particular set of data. So you could have, for example, mechanisms where the rate of revelation of data per second or per block is controlled. How to implement that is, all of these are research questions that are not yet implemented, and some of them it's an open question. What are the trade-offs that you would have in front of that? And there's one last one which we deliberately did not put forward for the roadmap of ZSAs this early, which is, how do we approach freezing of assets? It's a big question, and of course we want to first enable the movement of assets, and freezing of assets is a requirement that can be approached by many directions, and the trade-offs there are also very interesting to research. So in conclusion, I want to remind everyone, why are we doing this? And I don't want to make this a small thing. First of all, the same techniques that we use on our ecosystem on Zcash blockchain can be used for every single money transfer in the future. And I strongly believe that there won't be money that without very strong privacy embedded into that money system. Of course, we all believe that money will be digital because we've seen how it works and understand the benefits. But you can see here Yoav Sofer, who's the person in Bank of Israel, demonstrating to the ZK proof community, the community of researchers standardizing zero knowledge, explaining to them why he believes that privacy is important for digital cash, and that it's a matter of debate in a society where to put the thresholds, but it's clear that when you transact, you should be able to decide who sees the data. And I think there's an underlying assumption here that is even stronger. Why is this a big necessary effort to find the balance between privacy and compliance for humanity? Why is it so important? There's an inherent human thing about transacting and functioning in the digital world, something that is difficult for humans to comprehend, which is when you leave a trace digitally, it's there forever. And we all sometimes make mistakes. We all can believe one day that something we're doing here is worth doing, and then later realize late that this transfer, whatever activity was in the past, well, that was a mistake, and future self would have wanted past self and past mistakes to be removed from the public record. And it's very human to want to have the ability to take risks and have the right to be wrong. Of course, sometimes the judgment of others is, in their eyes, they believe that you've done something wrong. And it's also very human to not give the ability of anyone anytime in the future to judge your every single thing that you're doing. So we're not adapted as humans to think of all the consequences of every single thing we do in a form or in a context where it's all immutably saved forever. And now with the ability of advanced systems like AI to scrutinize everything and to extract consequences or readings from all of the past digital traces, this is not something that humans are meant to deal with. If this is paralyzing to all of us, and many of the Zcash users, what they love the most about this ecosystem is the fact that they can experiment and move things around without even having to have the mental burden of thinking of, when I moved these numbers from left to right, was there a tiny tax consequence, or is there any law on the planet that I just broke for someone from performing an action on a blockchain? So, of course, we all would want to be able to be in a world where that is adapted for the human way of doing things. And we all understand that there's clear examples of wrong and evil, even when in times where it's debated, there's extremes where there's agreement. And the ability for us to be able to accept the good uses and to offer tools to remove the bad ones, I think it makes Zcash a robust place. So this is what I wanted to share, and I'm happy to take more questions. I'm seeing a few. Right. Is there a framework that allows developers to know which regulation is worth investing on? Or is it compliance, or is compliance an endless moving goalpost, an oasis that we would chase forever and ever? That's an excellent question. So I don't know if we will ever develop in Zcash systems that reach the oasis of compliance, in the sense that I'm not familiar with any institution in the world that can take these techniques and actively bless them. It's the actors that interact with Zcash that have some more defined sense of compliance and a more pragmatic, down-to-earth set of rules that serve as a target. So what we should be trying to do, I believe, is invite those actors that act as in between the general, governments and general population and the blockchain system. We should make sure that what we're building has tools for those actors that want to be compliant to do so, and sends a signal to those who wish to misuse the blockchain for nefarious purposes to go elsewhere. Okay. Another question. Limiting the rate of revealing information seems not to respond to an existing regulation. A regulator could argue that you must reveal all the data about sanctioned addresses regardless of the rate, and then you would have a conflict between the technically enforced policy and the regulation. Yeah, so I think this conflict between what's technically there and the regulation will pop its head in many different places. So what we should try to achieve is sufficient pragmatic outcomes, meaning what we exploit here is the fact that most of us as users and as stakeholders of the Zcash ecosystem, a vast majority realizes that Zcash is used for good purposes and wants this ecosystem to be used for good purposes. So we can leverage the fact that we count on each other to somehow find the average place that we all agree is the average use of these techniques, and doesn't constitute blatant money laundering, terrorism financing, and other bad uses. I think the question of rate limiting the information is a research topic. We don't know how it would be approached, but you could see systems where the thresholds would be a form of negotiation between the ecosystem and the law enforcement that use it. And if there's bad, overuse of this threshold, well, the ecosystem could react to this overuse. I don't expect a pre-acknowledgement of a feature with saying, yes, this passes a defined set of rules. That's never been the case on anything in crypto. Okay, another question. Should compliance protocols treat regulators as potential adversary against which security and transparency properties must be enforced? My gut feeling is that we should be pragmatic, in the sense that these are partners with us to make our ecosystem, to get rid in our ecosystem of all those bad actors that we don't want. And as I said, we can't see all the uses of the Zcash ecosystem because we designed it this way. So we rely on the work of law enforcement and regulators to help us weed out those bad actors. Now, also, I mentioned it before, today, Zcash is barely used or not used for those activities. There's been reports on, addresses and lists of crypto addresses that are used for terrorism or for other thefts and things like this. There's no ZEC in those lists. If there is, it's old and very few and in between, barely any. So I would call those regulators, they're not adversary. Of course, when you talk to one regulator and you tell them, you talk to them about overreach of state, they all have in mind another state that they believe is in overreach, and all of them can relate to this fear of giving too much power to one entity to do anything. So they never apply it on themselves. When we have conversations with law enforcement, they can think of other law enforcement jurisdictions and governments where there's clear overreach of that government, but they never apply it on themselves. So I think the most pragmatic way of characterizing law enforcement is trying to use the fact that they have a mandate to seek criminals and facilitate weeding out of criminals as much as possible, especially as a signal to criminals or bad actors not to be joining this network. All right. Other questions? I'm by the way, this is recorded, and I expect the bulk of questions to come afterwards. So if you're seeing this not live, you can still ask questions, and I will try to revisit and answer as I can. With whatever answer I think is best at the time, but I don't really have all the answers. What stops a regulator from saying you clearly have the technical capability to add compliance for ZEC because you added it for other assets? This undermines your argument of just providing neutral infrastructure. Add compliance for ZEC now or we'll shut you down. Well, arguably, first of all, we need to propose to the Zcash ecosystem directions and features, and then collectively it can be accepted or not. And it's not in the hands of a particular company or person where Zcash is going. So I strongly advocate for sending those signals on in those places where we're already in regulated territory. So stable coins are clearly regulated territory because the underlying asset sits in a bank that's regulated. So I think it's something that is straightforward to accept as a community, because we're not talking about undermining anything in the system. We are inviting stablecoin issuers to use these augmented facilities, these strong privacy facilities, and still be able to work with regulation. I don't know if that answered the question fully. Okay, we're going deeper in the rhetoric. So if the backdoor-like compliance functionality is introduced, won't it make all issuers afraid of not enabling it, effectively making it mandatory? Yes. Next question. I think the longer answer is, if you're a stablecoin issuer, you probably need to look at the regulatory environment to be an issuer, and part of you're under a regime that's much more strict than any feature that we would add on Zcash. So the functionality that we would be adding is signaling to stablecoin issuers, this is a great ecosystem for you, and you by joining this ecosystem, you would serve your clients and have them give them a much stronger service of payment and value transfer with full privacy. But I don't see an alternative for a stablecoin issuer not to be. How can they be an issuer if they don't already are? If they're not already under a pretty strict compliance regime? And I didn't bite the backdoor lack compliance. It's not a backdoor. It's front and center. You are relinquishing. I can't say this word. You forego your unfortunately your privacy versus the issuer. But in a way, the moment you started using those coins, somewhere along that chain, when somebody wants to redeem the coins from the issuer, they need to show the issuer that the coin traveled in legitimate places. So it's an inherent property of stablecoins that today with the scrutiny that they undergo, it's an inherent property that they need to verify everything. So it's not a backdoor, it's the ability to interact with stakeholders that have this kind of regime. Okay, I think I answered all the questions as best I could. This is a I think it's a very important topic for our community. At Kedit, we see it as something front and center, because the impact on all of us is huge. This is what money will look like 5, 10, 20 years from now, and Zcash is the place where this is born. So we really see it with with the seriousness that comes with this statement. Oh, and one cherry. Will Bits of Gold launch the first stablecoin on ZSA? So thank you for the question. Bits of Gold is currently in a pilot for a stablecoin on another ecosystem. I think that there's the day we can adopt these techniques in Bit, or the day we can onboard on Zcash and serve the Zcash ecosystem with a stablecoin, we will probably have reached a level of maturity of features where many stablecoins in many different regions will already be on Zcash. Unfortunately, in Israel, we're a little bit late on those aspects. Thank you again for having me, and thanks everyone for organizing such a great event. I look forward to see the rest of the sessions.
Hello, checking in from ZconV in Barcelona. I am joined by Paul Poi from Edge. Paul, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Good event.
Yeah.
Great meeting some people new and some people from way back. And it's been a great event to go to. I love these a little bit smaller, intimate events.
Yeah.
It's just the right size.
Yeah, I totally agree here. I think, so before we dive into this, I think it's always good to provide an introduction, say a introduction on yourself, what you're working on, and then why you're at Zcon.
Yeah, so my name is Paul Poi. I'm CEO and co-founder of Edge. Our company's been in the crypto Bitcoin industry since 2014, originally building a Bitcoin wallet that was focused on payments.
Okay.
And then pivoted to Edge in 2018 to build more of a multi-asset app, admittedly more focused on exchange and DeFi functionality.
Okay.
But amidst all of that, we've always been a company focused on privacy.
Okay.
Originally as a Bitcoin wallet, we had worked with, for some people that may go way back, we had worked with Amir Taki to contribute to the Lib Bitcoin project, which was actually an open source re-implementation from scratch of a Bitcoin full node.
Oh, very cool.
In a modular way that had some privacy features such as coin join and stealth addresses. That was on the roadmap before we pivoted to Edge. We realized a lot of the limitations of doing that on Bitcoin, and so we never ended up doing any of that kind of privacy stuff on Bitcoin. But as soon as we had built Edge, we built it obviously in a way that was much more multi-asset friendly, in a language that would let us incorporate other assets. And although I'm here at Zcon, at the time we could not integrate Zcash. The ecosystem was not ready for us to do so. We were the first multi-asset app to incorporate Monero.
Very cool.
And it was well appreciated by the community, and still one of our biggest core group of users comes from the Monero community. We can tell from at least the exchange volume. What brings us to Zcon? We're, as I said, very passionate about privacy. We have more privacy protocols integrated in our app, and Zcash itself has easily the most bulletproof, hardened privacy tech of the entire ecosystem. And what I really want to see and do here is help drive usability, because while it has the best tech on privacy, it has admittedly what I think is the worst usability. So I'd love to drive better usability to Zcash to really blend the best of both worlds.
So let's dive into that. Amir Taki is now working on something called Darkfly. everyone should check out Dark.
Absolutely check it out.
Freaking cool. It's awesome. And they're a great community, really driving forward.
They need to come something like ZCon. They were supposed to speak at Monerotopia, but
Yeah.
come out.
Okay. And one sidebar, one thing I like about DarkFi is there is a barrier of entry to really like kind of get in. Like you have to like download their software, then like enter their IRC chat. Like they have a Telegram, but like there is like this, you have to be extremely interested to kind of like enter that. So I think that's a really cool way to kind of find the people who really want to contribute.
For the people from the contribution side, I think that's a fair barrier. Obviously, once you want to get it out to the users, then you've got to eliminate all those barriers.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't get adopted. In a way, Edge was trying. Edge at the time when we launched the company was called Airbits. We were trying to be Amir's dark wallet for the masses.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Right. You know, we had brighter colors, friendlier, marketing and visuals and icon, and nowhere did it say the word dark or anonymous, blah blah blah. But we were trying to bake in a lot of the privacy stuff that you just wouldn't get in the average wallets. So it didn't pan out. Admittedly, I just think Bitcoin just isn't capable of it.
Okay.
Especially now that it's ossified and won't put stuff into layer 1. And now we're looking at things like Zcash.
So let's like with things like Zcash, let's dive into that usability side.
Yes.
Right. So I wouldn't call myself a member of the Monero community, but I definitely use Monero. I really am inspired by like a lot of the things they're working on. Do you think Zcash's the issues that it sometimes has with the usability, is it a technical limitation? Is it kind of like community consensus around maybe holding it instead of trying to spend it? Why do you think Monero, for example, is arguably more widely adopted than Zcash?
Yeah. Clearly, it's not more widely adopted because it's more private, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Clearly, like we know that and the Monero community knows that too. They know the flaws in the privacy of Monero. Fundamentally, I think it's more widely adopted because it is very much easier to use on at least 2 fronts. The main front is privacy by default.
Okay.
So there's one address format in Monero, and there is no having to guess, is this transparent? Is this a Z address? Is it a unified address? If it's unified, am I sending to a transparent? Or am I receiving in my transparent because I have a transparent in my unified versus one that only has a Z? You can see this is kind of going down crazy now, like rabbit hole confusion for the non-Zcon attendee, right? As a Zcon attendee, we're in that small little echo chamber of
0.1 per 0.5.
Yeah, of course we know what a T versus Z address is and the ramifications. And so Monero got that piece right. It's just everything is private. You've got one address format. There is 100% compatibility across any wallet, payment processor, exchange that supports Monero. Okay. That's the first level that is just unarguable. And I saw the same challenge in the Bitcoin ecosystem, which has no privacy, but has now counting 1, 2, 4 address formats in Bitcoin. All right, 2 are by and large very compatible. The 1 address and the 3 address, the multi-sig, but the Bec32 and Taproot addresses are still not widely interchangeable and compatible across wallets. So, pretty much address format, simple as that. Huge friction.
So I guess a recommendation then is if Zcash doesn't deprecate T addresses at the protocol level, is there something that application developers can do to mitigate those types of security risks?
I mean, there's the one thing they can do is what Edge did is we just simply don't allow T addresses.
You just say we're going to be Z address.
Only going to be address only.
Yeah, and then at this point, it's like only Z, like you
C to Z, everything's a Z address.
Well, the other thing too is, if I'm understanding this correctly, if you get into some of the other Zcash wallet applications, you can make your unified address only your shielded addresses. So when you're receiving, you can only receive to your sapling and orchard address. But that even has like some privacy leakage because if you're transferring from sapling to orchard, there's some privacy.
I think that's an accepted one, right? That's no more privacy leakage than probably the combination of what Monero already requires to have a good user experience. Now, unified addresses are kind of mandatory now because not only is there transparent Z addresses, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but now there's also sapling versus orchard addresses. And so even if you're fully private, you still have to deal with 2 different address formats.
Exactly.
So now unified addresses are mandatory to reconcile all of those differences. So I think they went in the right direction, but they did it a right direction, which is just duct tape over, duct tape, right? So there was what I think is still relatively an unfortunate decision made early on, which now required this bandage on top. I think going forward, once it gets all laid out, as long as they don't make any other drastic changes, we're okay. But now we've got this legacy stuff and just like technical debt, you have to deal with it for some period of time. before you can deprecate and be done with it.
Exactly. So it's just about, as we're in this like potential interim phase where we might deprecate G addresses one day, and that's an argument we probably need to present in the community. It's kind of like, let's not make any more radical changes now and make sure that the applications are implementing these features.
Yeah, and you pretty much need wide support of unified addresses before the address problem goes away. Right, and then it could take a while.
Do you think there's a cultural element to all of this? Like, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, I haven't been to a Monero conference. I spoke at Monerotopia virtually this year. But I see when the Monero community goes to conferences, like the transactions kind of like spike really high because they're all interacting and using it peer-to-peer.
They're literally using it. And
Do you think that's also a cultural thing that Zcash might need to change? And what would you recommend for people that want to use Zcash?
No, I think the people here want to transact in Zcash.
Okay.
They want to go out to the dinners and pay each other back in Zcash.
Yeah, as we were last night.
Exactly. They want to do all those things, but you know, like I sat at dinner. I said, sure, pay me in Zcash. Here's my address. I'm willing to take it and have no idea if I received it because I'm waiting for our wallet to sync.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to trust because these are people I know that, yeah, they're right.
That happened to me last night because you're on like an international data plan and your wallet's not syncing as fast. It's really slow syncing. And then I have to like wake up this morning and sync it. And I go, oh, okay. I'm like, okay, I got the $30 worth of Zcash.
Exactly. You mentioned you had, virtually attended Monerotopia. If you were physically at Monerotopia, there were merchants all over the conference accepting, and many of them were accepting Monero. And so people were paying with Monero, and that likely wouldn't have worked with Zcash because these merchants wouldn't have sat there waiting for their wallet to sync to determine if they received money. Yeah, that wouldn't have been really acceptable to them. So therein lies what I think is point 2, which is the speed of syncing, being able to send your money, being able to detect your money. And that's easily the biggest thing that has to be resolved outside of the address format. I think the address format is one of those, you need to resolve it. You already have the solution with unified addresses, but it just needs to get adopted. So the ECC team and Zcash Foundation have kind of put forward and put priority on developing that solution to the address problem, and it just needs adoption.
Okay.
The syncing problem, one of my biggest concerns is it's not even on the roadmap to fix. I did get out of a promising, discussion with Nate Wilcox, who I think you were just chatting with, and was made aware that they're at least aware of a solution. Like they did a little research and they're aware of a solution, which is akin to one that the Monero team already has on the roadmap.
Okay.
So they're aware of one, but they have not at all put it on any kind of schedule or put any dev resources on like, hey, we should implement this. And this is my screaming at the top of the roof thing, like, house is on fire, do it ASAP.
Because this is in your mind, and I would agree with you on this. It's like if we can fix the mobile application experience relative to Zcash and privacy, then we could really start to see this thing have a lot of adoption.
I don't see any advantage to Monero on a user experience or privacy side if you fix this one thing, right? You fix this one, unified addresses are already going to take care of the address problem. Just need wallets to adopt it, and they're doing that, right? Like it's on our roadmap to do. But without this instant sync, I call this zero sync, like no sync, meaning as soon as you launch your wallet, the only thing the wallet has to do is go and ask for its transactions from a node or a server, and it gets its transactions. There's no per block. The point being is no matter how long you've been offline, has no bearing on how quickly it takes to get your most recent info.
Yep.
All right. So you could go to a completely different phone, and it takes just as long to sync as if you're on the same phone.
That would be, that's an issue, right? Because sometimes I do go maybe 7, 8, 9 days without using Zcash.
That's good. A month.
Yeah, I'm like using, but it's because I'm using other stuff, right? Like
yeah, exactly.
I like to use I use Lightning to purchase a lot of things. I use Monero as well. Just because there's a little bit more options out there to do those things. But at the same time, right? If I open my Zcash wallet after 9 days, it's it takes a relatively long time.
Exactly.
And that's not even dealing with someone who's trying to maybe restore a wallet who might not have used it in a year. It's just like it becomes a user experience where people start to think,
this is not a usable tech.
Well, it's not even that. People think they lost their money sometimes. They're like, oh, I can't see the funds updated and like what's going on. I'm a little bit scared.
Was this a scam that I got, suckered into?
Exactly. And I think if we just fix those things at a UX level, it's a bit.
And these are not at the UX level. These are literally at the protocol level.
Sorry. Yeah. level.
But no, you're right. It affects the UX. So you're right. It's at the UX level, but it can't be fixed at the UX level.
Yep.
Affects the UX, but it has to be fixed at the protocol level. And this is one that, Monero partially did. So the difference in mentality between the communities that I've sensed is that the Monero community is willing to they have a different balance of UX to privacy.
Okay.
There's some privacy compromises at the benefit of UX that they're willing to take and then improve the privacy. Whereas Zcash said, let's go privacy all out and then compromise it later for UX. And I think that the challenge there is if you go privacy outright, no one's using it, right? So who are you protecting?
To use.
Whereas if you start with UX first, you have a few people using it. As it starts hitting more critical mass, your privacy is improving alongside with, the need for a stronger level of privacy. So that seeming like a cultural difference between the two. And if you're looking at it as a race between the two, clearly the focus on UX seems to have been a better choice.
Yeah,
You wouldn't know at the very beginning, right? You might think like, oh, everyone cares about just absolute privacy, but at least historically, it looks like that would be kind of the better choice.
I mean, that's a really interesting point. And also from a UX perspective as well, like with lack of unified address adoption, users have that. And they're signing, like they're entering a social contract of I am purchasing or acquiring Zcash to have more privacy, and then they withdraw. They don't get it. The address and they don't get it. So now they're entering a social contract that's been broken.
Totally broken. Yeah.
So I guess things that I'm taking away from this chat is that the Zcash community needs to make changes at the protocol level to enable better user applications, and also focus on seeing applications adopt unified addresses to ensure the security of users.
Yeah, and I think unified addresses are on the address front. If you want to talk true privacy, are only half the problem. So if you have a wallet that supports unified addresses and it supports T addresses and Z addresses in it, which will give you better compatibility with apps that only can send to a transparent address.
Yep.
You need to have both embedded in the unified address. Well, the problem now is you receive into transparent, and now your privacy is gone for those funds. So the auto shielding, which is another piece that ECC had worked on, is also necessary.
Yep.
Which means that you need to auto shield that money as soon as you receive it, and then rotate the T address into another address.
Exactly.
Receive, auto shield, rotate. And that's, not the easiest thing to do.
Especially for users who might have not interacted with these protocols.
And from a user experience point of view, there's one unavoidable thing about that, is you will never receive the amount that the person sent. So I sent you 1 ZAC. You'll receive 0.99 something ZAC because you incur the cost of shielding it.
Exactly.
And that could create an entire user experience problem, especially at point of sale. So if you're at point of sale,
that's a really good point.
you need to receive a specific amount. Someone's of bad privacy makes the privacy better and the user experience better.
No, 100%.
Ironically.
Of that.
And the thing that I'm hoping that is not running through the heads of the community, I remember talking to Zuko about this. I was like, hey, when is it on the roadmap for people to remove T addresses? Like, we bring up the community and they just don't prioritize it. They're not telling us that they want to remove T addresses. And I hope that what's in their head isn't the value of exchange listings. Because we know that the vast majority of the exchanges that support ZAC don't support withdrawing to a Z address. Hey, what is it? Gemini B.
Gemini is the only one.
Is the only one. And so the fear that you would lose exchange support, and Monero took the stance of like, we don't care, right? We're going to build a product that people want so bad that the exchanges are forced to it. We are not lobbying them to support it.
Exactly.
And that's just a different type of mentality. It's like it's product first, product first, product first. It's kind of like the startup mentality. Product first, investors come to you.
I think that's a really good way to look at it, because even if we have this potential exchange problem when we deprecate T addresses and we don't have that argument to fall back on, even from a compliance perspective, what I'm kind of arguing for this weekend is like, even if we decentralize accessibility to come in and participate in earning the block reward, then we can create an ecosystem where people are just bypassing the exchanges entirely. So more people are earning newly issued ZAC. They're able to store it. They're able to use it, and then potentially create products and applications that onboard other users. And it's about creating an ecosystem that potentially allows us to bypass.
Or you start putting engineering into things like cross-chain dexes,
Exactly.
supporting Zcash in like a Thorchain, and everybody has the ability to on-ramp onto Bitcoin. And then now it's one dex right into Zcash.
Yeah.
Right. So focusing more along those lines versus lobbying exchanges and trying to get support for ZAC and then yet another exchange. And like Coinbase was the big deal, right? When it was announced, at the end of the day, did it really make a difference in adoption? I don't know. It's hard to say, because I think
it's hard to say. And also, are we, with all of the issues that have gone on in like the last year with regards to wallets and syncing, if a user went and bought Zcash on Coinbase and then withdrew it to a wallet and had that type of user experience,
they ended up dumping it.
and then they ended up just like, okay, the minute I can get this back onto Coinbase, I'm going to sell it or exchange it to something else. So
yeah,
I totally get that. Yeah, I totally get the argument there. Has it really helped us drive adoption of usage around Zcash? So
yep.
Awesome. Is there any parting thoughts that you have for the Zcash community as we wrap this up?
I think that sums it up pretty darn well. What are kind of like the action items is for especially the non-technical and technical people, speak up about it. Like, speak up, because I honestly do gauge that they are listening. Like the Zcash Foundation, ECC are listening. There just might not enough people speaking up directly to them. It's almost like the elephant in a room.
Yeah.
And you don't want to speak up about it. Like, there was a panel of 5 to 6 community advocates, and the final question was, what is the thing you think we should focus on to drive Zcash adoption? And nobody said this. And
I think it's like an elephant in the room. Like, I said it last night on a panel when Josh was talking about it, and I was like, if someone withdraws to a T address and they don't mean to, is that breaking the social contract? And it's like, yes, that is a break in the social contract of privacy that we're trying to provide. So I think it might just be an elephant in the room too, that people are scared to.
Yeah, and I think people should not be scared.
Yeah.
Because I think, the part I'm going to give like the leads of ECC and the Zcash Foundation for is they listen and they take note.
Yeah.
And you just got to be vocal. And so if you feel like this is if you disagree with me, then no, whatever. You're like, I don't mind waiting 5 minutes for it to sync, and I open my wallet all the time. For those of you that do agree, be vocal about it.
Cool.
Like, nothing's going to move unless you're vocal. So that's my parting words.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for the time.
No, thanks for having me. Cool. Appreciate it.
Checking in from ZconV, Joel. Cheers. Cheers. I don't have a sip real quick. So yeah, we're checking in from ZconV. What are your thoughts so far?
Oh, this is a great event. High production values, quality people, and quality cerveza.
Quality cerveza.
Yeah.
I'm really digging the Estrellas. We've been drinking that everywhere. It's like the national beer, I think, here, and it's quite good.
Yeah. See, I'm a recovering craft beer snob.
Okay.
But it's funny, towards the end of I kind of got more cocktails, but towards the end of that, I've kind of become to appreciate this simple beer.
Okay.
Like, my favorite is like a Märzen Oktoberfest style. This is a very beer tasting beer. It's like not like, Russian Imperial Stout with aged bourbon barrel, all that stuff I used to like before. I still like it. I've kind of appreciated an easy drink because life is hard.
Because I think the other thing too is like, if you're going to like drink craft beers, it's very easy to like, oh, I'm going to enjoy all these different types of beers, when in reality, you're just giving yourself an excuse to drink like 12 beers. And that's a lot of fun. Drinking 12 beers at once is a great time, but we don't always need to do that. Sometimes we just need a nice standard, half decent beer to enjoy.
And introducing a theme for the rest of this show, the bell curve.
Okay.
Start, the bell curve meme.
Yeah.
With the idiot, the verse like, cold beer tastes good.
Yeah.
And then, no, it has to be bourbon barrel aged, you double IBU, whatever. And the end, wizard, cold beer tastes good.
Cold beer tastes good.
So it's kind of the same.
Cool.
Thing. And yeah, we'll be hitting on that theme a whole lot. I have a feeling this conversation.
Yeah, it's especially this evening during the little cocktail hour. I'm looking forward to that. But
Yeah.
something I wanted to take some time. Obviously, we're doing a few recordings here, just getting some people's thoughts on the conference, things that are coming up in Zcash. Something I wanted to talk to you specifically about is using cryptic, or cryptocurrencies, rather.
Who the hell does that?
Sorry,
Who the hell does that anymore?
I know who the hell does that. I don't know if we can swear on this, but we might get into that.
Who the heckin' does
Who the heck does that? Hell's not even a swear word, but nonetheless, I almost said like I was dropping that.
Yeah.
Whatever.
By the end of the beer, we'll
Exactly. We'll finish that within the next 15 minutes, and the last 2 minutes will be wild.
and the roll.
Bull. So using crypto, I'm doing this, or cryptocurrencies rather. You've been doing this for 8-9 years.
Well, so I haven't earned fiat currency in almost 8 years. It'll be 8 years this December, I think.
Okay.
And I've been using crypto. It will be 10 years in September.
Okay.
Just using it, but not exclusively using it. Would be, 2015. Yeah.
So with that, you've kind of put on social media and your writing and your podcast, and put a lot about how you can't be to do this. It's really hard to be a maximalist, because at times the applications and other currencies you've been using have not. It's not that they haven't worked. It's just they haven't provided the same type of user experience that you're looking for. So tell me a little bit more about your views on them. And this isn't just Bitcoin maximalism, right? Like,
Yeah, no, maximalism is a state of mind because
it's a state of mind.
tell me
More about maximalism and how that does not translate into effectively living off crypto full time.
Yeah, well, first of all, if I became I guess, one could call kind of a Bitcoin maximalist under a loose definition of terms. Like, I never was one of those, like, anti-innovation people. That's just never going to be me. I'm sorry. But in the early days, I was like, all I cared about was Bitcoin. And I heard about, like, in 2014, when I went to the Porcupine Freedom Festival. This is before I was living all on crypto, but it was like a week-long festival in the mountains of New Hampshire. I didn't bring any fiat, even though I still had like a bank card and stuff like that then. I still earned fiat for a job. I only brought Bitcoin with me the whole week, and I spent 100% Bitcoin the entire week there on, like, food and other trinkets and things like that. And the only thing there's one coffee station that wouldn't take Bitcoin, only took silver, but someone was selling little silver coins for Bitcoin, and so I bought the silver coins of Bitcoin to pay for coffee. My point is, like, there was a vendor who was selling bacon pancakes for Bitcoin, Litecoin, I think Dogecoin, and Darkcoin before it was called Dash. And I was like, oh, this is cool. But, it's alts, as they used to be called, still sometimes are, were a novelty. And I only cared about, I was like, okay, that's cool to play around with, but I want Bitcoin. This is what moves forward. So then 2015, I decided, you know what, I'm going to just jump headfirst into space. I'm going to stop taking fiat. I'm going to only earn Bitcoin from here on out. And it was a good, solid year of that before the block started filling up. I had so many sad stories of, skipping lunch because I couldn't get a confirmation in time. I just had no money available, so I just literally had to go hungry. Or, it took so long to get a gift card to confirm a transaction, to buy something, that my phone died, and I didn't have a charger on me, and I couldn't, buy a charger because my money was in the dead phone now. And it just it just sucked. I could not keep doing this. And so that's when I expanded my horizons, because I said, yeah, I either got to go crawling back to my bank and say you were wrong in my bank account, or I have to find a different way. And so Bitcoin took a several year vacation from digital cash use cases. And it was later in the 2016, early 2017, all the way up till whenever the first, whenever Phoenix and Breeze wallet came out for Lightning, to where you can kind of get by using it again.
Yeah, I mean, I admittedly, I use Bitcoin probably 7 to 8 times a month for digital cash purposes.
Yeah, today it works because people built up I don't think it's ideal. I don't think the trust models of those wallets are ideal, but it's still fine. But I would have had to take a break for years, or just get really rich I can afford transaction fees on chain in order to make that happen. That demaximalizes a person.
Yeah, no, for sure. So you have experience with using a variety of these different cryptocurrencies to not invest in, but earn and provide yourself a higher level of arguably a higher level of self-sovereignty. And people like yourself and myself would argue for that. People disagree with us, but that's a decision you personally made. What is your experience with okay, let's start here. What have been the currencies you've used the most and why? And what's the, for, let's say, Monero, Zcash, Dash, Bitcoin? What have been kind of some of the major differences you've seen, and what are the things that really attract you in your use case?
So to be perfectly honest, it was like 95 to like almost 100% Bitcoin up until the end of 2016. And from the end of 2016 to 2020, 2021 was like statistically 100% Dash. Like I touched and used, but like let's be honest, like almost all that. And in the last couple of years, it's like 80 to 90% Dash for payments, right? But then so for example, I use Thorchain and the Maya protocol for a lot of like BeFi stuff. I use Polygon for my NFTs, like non-money things. And then anytime, like today, like since I've been at Zcon, I've made more Zcash transactions than Dash transactions because I can use it. I like privacy, and I like that people here want to take it. And so I'm really into that, but it just, as far as like when the tiers, you go in from the tier of like Bitcoin, you can do most things on, but there's clunkiness to it because Bitcoin's accepted almost like everywhere in the crypto world, right? Lightning, not necessarily. So you could use clunky Bitcoin, or you can use clunky but fast and cheap, depends on how you want to define Lightning. But so that's how you can spend it at the most places. And then there's like Litecoin, which makes you wait for confirmations. That sucks. But it also is pretty universal in spending. And then right in the acceptance tier, right below that is Dash, to where Dash is like, or in some cases above. Like, for example, you can pay all your bills in the US with Spritz Finance, with Bitcoin and Dash, but not Litecoin. So generally speaking, for usability in a daily life, Dash has very high adoption, not the highest adoption, but very high adoption and very high usability, and it kind of has that marriage of both. So that's what that is. And since I might earn more Zcash than Dash, depends on the month and what I'm doing. But now that I have a more significant amount of income in Zcash, that's what I'm looking at next, is like, how can I find ways of spending this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've earned Zcash, and I've worked, obviously, in the past, I've accepted percentages, like relatively substantial percentages of my paychecks in Zcash.
Yeah.
Grants that I've worked on or paid out in Zcash, etc. So I'm kind of in that same boat. And for me, I've always kind of had it to opt to using like a swap to like Bitcoin or Monero to do a transaction that I want to do.
Yeah.
I've found that isn't the worst thing in the world, but it's always not the best user experience. And I definitely, like, for example, I was just living in the UK, and BitRefill has like all of the like British grocery stores.
Yeah, like Tesco.
Yeah, and they've got Waitrose, which is where we had a Waitrose near like my apartment.
Yeah.
It was like super easy to just like go into my phone, go onto the website. I'll be yelling. Go onto the website and then purchase a gift card like right then and there. It's like, it's a little bit of time. Like it's like 30 to 40 seconds of your time. If I was running my own node as well, so if my node was like working and I was like doing all that stuff.
Yeah, you have your glutton for punishment, huh?
Yeah. And if it like still had like Phoenix and stuff and Moon Wallet that I could use in exchange for that. But it's an easy experience.
Yeah.
And it's enjoyable, and it's not perfect. It's not peer-to-peer. But it's a higher level of self-sovereignty.
That's another one. So I use BitRefill very heavily.
Okay.
And for at least small payments, they accept, because Dash has instant confirmations. So I can, just like you said, like buy it in that 30, 40 second window. And so you can't do that with on-chain Bitcoin. You can do it with Lightning. You can't do it with Litecoin. So that kind of solidifies it, like, as far as like what works everywhere. It's just like it's in BitRefill and it's instant. And so Lightning Network and Dash are like the two that equivalent. They give
for sure. And I think obviously with kind of some more work on like Zcash wallet applications and the sync times, everything.
Yeah.
That could be potentially a future. So what do you think the community needs to do? Like I've heard you say in the past, and I don't want to like misquote you, but you've said it seems like a lot of the Zcash community doesn't want to spend or doesn't want to doesn't want to use it. I had Paul from Edge just on. He argued that it's just really hard to do. So like for me, instead of using it, I'll just swap into Lightning because it's with my Zcash dash because it's easier.
I would say,
what would you like? Do you think that's a reason the Zcash is not widely adopted on its platform?
I'll split it evenly 3 ways.
Okay, cool.
A third of it is what I initially said. Well, I'll get to that last. A third of it is what Paul said, which is,
No, I was just doing it to the camera.
yeah. So a third of it is what Paul said, that there are some sync time annoyances and things today. Maybe that sounds way too nice and glossing over, but it's just that, some user experience issues that makes it people not want to use it. However, no one here has really had that problem here. Like people are willing to go through the pain to do it here, for example.
Yeah.
So the other third is, no, people are very much using it. Like I'm wrong. People are using it.
Okay, cool.
So I'm right, but I'm also wrong. And so Paul's right. I'm also wrong. But where I'm right is so the Spritz Finance, I mean, I got a Brave ad because I've run Brave ad campaigns before. And so I'm just like, then I see a Brave ad campaign, gave me deja vu. It popped up a couple years ago. And I was like, wait, I didn't, because I thought it said like live all on crypto. And I literally just ran a Brave ad campaign that said something about live all on crypto. So I'm like, I'm not running an ad right now. I'm like, wait, no, that's a different Spritz. I haven't heard of them. So I click on the ad and I learn about this holy Zuko. There's this service I never knew existed. It's the holy grail of missing integrations in the US specifically. There have been European bill pay systems for crypto. There might be some things Zcash will have to investigate that, but there have been European bill pay systems for crypto forever. US has always been a big missing market because the US financial system does not play well with crypto, and all the regulatory nonsense going on right now just accentuates that. But we finally got one, and so I'm like, wow, this is cool. They only work on Polygon. I'm like, wow, that's even more interesting. And so I had the guy on my channel, the CEO, Chris, and I pretty soon was like, yo, you ever thought about integrating Dash? This would make my life easier. And so by communicating, getting with them, I got Dash on board. And it's like, great. And then I'm like, I'd love if I could get Zcash there, because then at least everyone in the US could say, I can pay for everything in my life with Zcash. Now it's useful to me. Now I can like do my little private donations to the Signal Foundation or Graphene or do whatever people love to do with like private uncensorable money. But then it's also, you have the excuse to have some to begin with, which is you have the excuse to zonal because you get the Zen or Zen, whatever. So then I started reaching out because I'm like, hey, who can help integration support? And I have some people in the forums that are like, yeah, we'll help out if this is, to give technical support, if I can just talk to them again about adding a different coin. And then I start polling people, and then a lot of people are like, I don't know, I wouldn't use that. Like, why? Like, nah, because, it's like a KYC service, and I'm all about like the privacy. It's like, but you KYC with your bank, and you pay all your bills through your bank, and your bank could confiscate your money anytime, and it's being inflated and paying for all kinds of awful things. That's not the case with Zcash, but you don't want to spend it like, nah. So there's a segment of the Zcash community that, obviously I'm being critical towards, who view Zcash and privacy as like a lark. Like they live their regular lives in a very surveilled, very controlled kind of way. Like,
guilty. Yeah.
Like everyone else. I mean, everyone has a little bit of that. I'm not judging them, but I'm saying they do that, and then they're super puritanical about their crypto uses, specifically Zcash, and their privacy and their devices. Like, oh, I'm not on social media, but I KYC through everything, for example. And we're like, they kind of look down on people that use their Zcash in a way that might be traced in some way. And it's just like, well, but you're not using it at all. You're using banks. And that's what drives me nuts, is people that let the perfect be the enemy of the good here for this. But again, I'm also not someone to tell people what they should.
All right, here we are. Let me go ahead and share my screen to get started with this one. So thanks for having me here, everybody. It's a real treat to be here with you virtually at ZconV. I really appreciate being a part of this community. I'm really proud of everybody that I work with there at Zcash Foundation, and proud of the folks at ECC, proud of everybody at Zcash Community Grants and everybody in the community who works so hard to make privacy normal. My name is J.W. Verrett. I serve on the board of the Zcash Foundation. I also am a law professor, teach banking, securities, corporate law, forensic accounting, stuff like that. And am, I guess, the elevator description, I'm a libertarian, but a banking and KYC AML law professor. So it's kind of a frustrating life that I live because I fight against all the things that I teach about. So here we are. Let's jump in. So the topic today is the implications of U.S. AML prosecutions. I want to talk about where we are right now as a community. I want to talk about the future and hopefully offer some insight that's useful. First, like every lawyer, I'm going to do a warning and a disclaimer that lawyers have to do. Sorry. Look, I'm not here to endorse DOJ's work, their actions. In fact, I'm a critic of it, and I've been involved in one of the cases I'm going to talk about today as a pro bono expert for the defense, and have fought against it and gotten to know some of these defendants personally. I'm not here to endorse it. I'm not here because I support it. Today's a risk management exercise. So today is assume that they win in the 4 cases I'm talking about today. Assume DOJ wins. What does that mean in terms of risk management? Despite the fact that I strongly oppose what they're doing because I believe it's illegal, because I believe it exceeds their authority under law. So this is a risk management exercise. Assume they win. How do you manage risk? I'm not your lawyer. I sit on a board and volunteer my time on the ZF board. I'm not a lawyer. I advise ZF, ECC, and ZCG to hire lawyers, rely on the advice of lawyers. I fight for privacy when I can. So we're at a difficult stage here. We're at the and then they fight you stage for privacy. These 4 cases I'm going to talk about today. You know, I think it's probably true of a lot of people in privacy communities, in all crypto privacy communities, in all crypto privacy communities. We're a small world. I think it's probably true that a lot of people have been watching these prosecutions. And the first thing you think about in your head, and it's atrocious that this is true, but it's true. It was true for me. First thing you think about in your head is, what if I'm in that seat? What if I'm next? What if I get that knock on the door at 6 a.m.? Even though I think what I'm doing is perfectly legal and legitimate. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And so hopefully part of what I can do here today is allay concerns, because Zcash is very different from anything described in even the most egregious abuses of power in DOJ prosecutions to date. Hopefully I can do that. Hopefully I can give us a framework to think about the future. So that's what I'm here to do today. So hopefully I can, I guess, maybe both get you thinking about things to be concerned about in the future, but also allay any current concerns you might have about where we stand today in the past, because I don't think the past and I don't think the present is concerning at all. So let's jump in. These 4 cases, I'm going to suggest the community study and get to know. You know, it's very weird to me, teaching securities law, that so many people in the crypto community know about the Howey test. This is a thing that like crypto builders know the Howey test so well, and it's a symptom of the dysfunction at the SEC that so many people in the crypto community have had to learn about the Howey test. I think in the same way, if you're going to build in privacy, I think you need to study these 4 cases. I think you need to download them. Websites like Court Listener have texts of the major filings in these cases, the indictments, the motion to dismiss, the response to the motion to dismiss. So I would definitely study these 4 cases in the same way that the broader crypto community studies the Howey test and the Howey case, the original Howey case, because I think it's important to see what happened and understand how what you're building is different from what happen to these cases. Let me talk about these four. Hopefully we'll get some lessons learned from them, and then I'll talk about the future. The general framework to think about this, there's uncertainty in the law, and it's a challenge to be a lawyer advising people just generally about uncertainty in the law. Clients say, what's legal and what's not? Tell me the lines and I'll follow them, and then everything will be all right. And then lawyers come back and they say, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, not because they want to, but because the law changes and the law is uncertain. But that problem is somewhat manageable for the most part in business law, except when it comes to crypto. When it comes to crypto, it's much harder, especially under the current environment where you have agencies that are politically charged to kind of want to kill crypto and to cut corners and expand the reach of doctrines as much as they possibly can, because the overall political environment for the current administration in the United States is kill crypto. I think a helpful way to look at it is under these four different zones I'm offering today: presumptively legal, presumptively illegal, clear precedent in those two. And then in the middle, two different areas on each side of the line. Gray areas, there are circuit splits, there's unclear regulatory guidance. And then rogue prosecutor risk, which is how I would describe, for the most part, the four cases I'm talking about today. I think the four cases I'm talking about today are all within the rogue prosecutor risk, which is to say something that is pretty clear under the average banking and securities lawyer's reading of the law is exceeds the agency or the DOJ's authority, but they're bringing the case anyway. So we're in rogue prosecutor land, which is difficult because, I'll tell you about what's in the indictments. I'll tell you about what's in the filings. That doesn't mean the government's going to win on those points. I think for the purposes of today's risk management exercise, we assume that they will win on what they claim the law is. I think it's so important, the work that Peter Van Valkenburg and Coin Center and Jerry Brito are doing to fight this. It's so important. The amicus briefs we've gotten from Blockchain Association, which ECC is a part of, those things are essential. I love that stuff. And I've been involved in one of the amicus briefs against the Tornado Cash, the Tornado Cash sanction, not their criminal case. Those things are so important. But for the purposes of my risk management exercise, just assume for a moment that all that loses, which I hope doesn't happen. But assume it loses and develop risk management guidance in response to that worst world scenario. So where we are now, Zcash is doing what it does, is building for the right reasons. First of all, let's start there. We're building a private layer one. It's just a private transaction enabling version of Bitcoin. No one in the culture of the Zcash community is not to make the kind of, I don't know, shit posting jokes, honestly, that the samurai guys were doing, right? We don't do that. And I think that we've had leaders who've done a very good job in Jack and Josh and Zuko, who are leading the culture. It's not okay in the Zcash community to kind of like joke about crime or something. We don't do that. And sometimes just a joke or a ribald comment about that claims something that's not even true can be used against you in court. So first of all, the culture of communication, how we communicate what we do, is one focused on the Fourth Amendment, one focused on privacy, one focused on privacy as consent, one focused on privacy as safety and security, one focused on, and this is an important narrative, and part of what we believe, privacy as an element of national security. So we're doing what we're doing for the right reasons. It's also the case that, and I think this is very important, we as a community are relying upon the fact that criminals just don't use Zcash. It just doesn't happen. That's not to say that we would suddenly become an illegal venture if that changed, because that's not true. Because criminals use Bitcoin with some frequency. That doesn't make building on Bitcoin illegal. But it just helps that it's also true right now, as we all are building and looking to the future, that criminals don't use Zcash. We can rely on, and we have knowledge of as a community, the fact that a report from the RAND Institute looked at, surveyed extensively dark web vendors that sell drugs online, and Zcash is not featured there. It's mostly Bitcoin and to some extent Monero. And that's not a slide on either one of those things, but it's just something that we rely on. It's also true that New York Department of Financial Services was vocally supportive of Zcash being listed on an NYDFS registered firm. So that's where we are now. In the future, it's possible for some builders in the future to get into the rogue prosecutor risk zone, depending on the design of what they build. So we have to think about that. So let's get into cases and learn some lessons from these cases. The first one I want to talk about is U.S. versus Sterlingoff. This case is very personal to me because I got to know Roman Sterlingoff. I spent about 30 hours with him in prison when I was an expert on his case. He's a nice guy. He was early to Bitcoin, and he did not run Bitcoin fog, in my opinion, not at all. And I think this is an important case because it's an innocent man who's looking at a lot of time. One of the lessons of that case is the government has abused conspiracy. Two of the 4 charges were conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitter. One of the things in developing that conspiracy argument that the prosecution claimed during closing argument was that a single act in furtherance of Bitcoin fog, even purchase of the domain bitcoinfog.com in 2011 was sufficient for conspiracy to commit money laundering, sufficient for conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitter. That's the only thing they could come close to associating with Roman was the purchase of that domain. They had a trace from his KYC Mt. Gox account through a number of intermediaries that they had no attributing information about, including Bitcoin addresses, including Orem Exchange, and including Liberty Reserve. And they had no attributing information at any of those. But anyway, they did have a trace that went to purchase of the ClearNet domain back in 2011. Roman said on the stand, I don't remember if I purchased that domain or not. I worked on a lot of projects, open source, as a kind of a non-dev with lots of other non-devs. I don't remember whether I purchased it or not. And that was the only thing they came close to associating him with that project. And they convicted him on that basis. So conspiracy is a broad tent, and it helps the government to stretch to kind of eliminate the statute of limitations as a defense, because the government says, well, you're part of the conspiracy back in 2011, you're part of a continued conspiracy, therefore we'll just ignore the statute of limitations. Now, conspiracy to some extent is kind of putting where the government gets to play on God mode. To charge conspiracy, the government has to demonstrate that there's an agreement to operate an illegal enterprise together. And they only need to show that one member of the conspiracy committed one act in furtherance of the criminal conspiracy. They don't have to show that you knew that the act was criminal, that constituted a part of the agreement. They only have to show that you agreed to commit an act, and whether or not you knew it, that act itself was criminal. Willful blindness is not a defense. In fact, this is quite the opposite. Juries get an instruction that willful blindness can constitute intent. So in other words, if you know your platform is being used by criminals and you make it easier for criminals to use whatever protocol you're building, that is sufficient to constitute intent for an agreement for conspiracy purposes, if the other elements of the conspiracy are met. Other aspects of the Sterlingoff case, the government, one of the frustrating things was the government kept using some language from the front page of Bitcoin Fog. And the front page said something to the effect of, this protocol is designed so that the proper authorities can't trace you. And the government kind of spun that to the jury as, see, what he means by that language is US DOJ, FBI prosecuting fentanyl and child sexual abuse material. And that's one way to understand that language, but it's not the only way, certainly. That language of evading proper authorities could mean Russia, could mean China, could mean Venezuela, could mean abuse of human rights protesters. It could mean a lot of things, as this community knows. So the government has a way of taking language out of context, which is why one of the things I mentioned early in the discussion was it's so important to be very careful about language, and to just be honest about the fact that we're building for the right reasons. There's also a venue overreach issue, but I offer a link to a podcast about this that I did with some of the lawyers on Law of Code. about the case if you want to learn more about it. I'm working on the appeal, and I'm so devoted to this case. I'll talk to you about anybody in the Zcash community about the Sterling case until I can't talk anymore. All right, let's talk about Tornado Cash. Peter V is the expert on the Tornado Cash case, and he's been working on it and doing important work. You know, I think it's important to study this. One of the reasons why I describe this as overreach and describe this as in the zone of rogue prosecutor is, if you saw it made the rounds on crypto Twitter, the government's response to a motion to dismiss in the case made some outlandish arguments. One of which was where the government claimed that, look, despite the fact that guidance from FinCEN in 2019 indicated that being a non-custodial protocol meant that you're not likely to be a money transmitter. We don't care about that because we get to bring criminal law, and criminal law is not bound by FinCEN guidance. So we're just going to come after you anyway. That filing was widely panned among crypto lawyers. Among crypto lawyers who were former DOJ, former government lawyers, former Treasury Department AML experts, panned that and were highly, highly critical of that filing from the government. I don't know if it'll survive. I don't know if all those arguments they put in there will survive. I hope not. I can't imagine they will. But it's useful to study that to see just what the government's capable of. There are obviously some factors in this case that kind of complicated a bit. The burn of the admin, you know, I wish the facts were perfect, right? For the legal win and for the precedent. I hope we get out of a win in this case. The facts aren't perfect because the burn of the admin key came a little late. There was the relayers, the DAO, the torn token that kind of complicate the argument, the pure argument about code is free speech. I think the government would come after them even if the facts were perfect, which is why this fight is so important. But some of those factors complicate the defense, and so it's important to be mindful of them. Samurai Wallet. So, I mean, if you're in the privacy community, you probably followed Samurai Wallet's Twitter. They play a little fast and loose on Twitter. I still, though, haven't seen a single post in which Samurai folks demonstrate an intent to further a specific crime. That's not in the indictment. It's not contained in the indictment at all. But still, the government has kind of twisted the general kind of, I don't know, joking about crime or whatever language from Twitter. They put it in the indictment, they try to spin it, and they're going to try to spin it in front of the jury. But there's not a single post from Samurai that says, you know, like one of the allegations is that bad proceeds of the Badger DAO hack went to Whirlpool. I haven't seen a post that says, oh, yay, we're so excited that happened, right? That doesn't exist. So I haven't seen anything that shows specific intent to a specific crime. But anyway, it's a lesson in being careful about public communication. This is also another case where the operator of CoinJoin, the wallet, and Whirlpool and the coordinator for Whirlpool run by these guys did not take custody. It just kind of coordinated signatures for CoinJoins. But the government claims that the Whirlpool was sort of like the money laundering operation, the unlicensed money transmitter. And these two defendants were in a conspiracy with that non-entity money laundering operation. It's sort of the theory that the government is developing there. U.S. versus Raul Rodriguez. This is another important case to keep in mind. And there are cases like it for local Monero. A big whale user of local Bitcoin in peer-to-peer transactions is deemed to be an unlicensed money transmitter. And I don't know the facts because the facts weren't fleshed out because this was a settlement. I don't know the full facts. The government claims he had knowledge that counterparties to the trades were trying to launder the proceeds of criminal activity, of illicit activity. I don't know that that's true because the government says a lot of nonsensical bullshit in DOJ press releases. But look, they don't like whale users of peer-to-peer platforms. And one of the things the government will say is part of the element of being an unlicensed money transmitter is that you're doing so for a profit, operating it as a business for a profit. And if you're an individual whale who likes to speculate in Bitcoin or Monero, and you're buying peer-to-peer, you're not buying at the market price, right? Because there's no oracle that goes to the local platform, the peer-to-peer platform. So you're going to be, but there's a substantial spread in those transactions. So the government will just take that natural fact of the peer-to-peer platform and say, see, they're making a profit on their purchases and sales. Therefore, they're operating a business, therefore unlicensed money transmitter. And they get you for, 10 years and you settle for 5, as was the case here. Just an abuse of power in my mind, but it's a threat vector to keep in mind. It's also useful to read these cases to get anonymity, kind of OPSEC guidance, and see some of the touch points, real world touch points that the government uses. Look, if there's anything that exists that can be subpoenaed, it will be subpoenaed. And if any information tracing to you can be found there, it will be found. And the other thing is that the government can now compel biometric access to your phone. So if you've got your password protector on your phone, they'll put your phone in front of your face, then they'll get into your password protector, and then they can get everything, right? So just be aware that that's how that works. And let's not be smug about these cases, because the level of focus keeps growing for each case that comes along. I like Star Wars references. There's 2 different types of actors in the rebellion in Star Wars. There's Mon Mothma, who has a coalition, who is very compliant. Then there's Saw Gerrera, who in the movie kind of does his own thing and doesn't coordinate with anyone, and probably hates Mon Mothma and Rebel Alliance as much as he hates the Empire. But I guess he hates the Empire more, but he doesn't get along with anyone. Doesn't coordinate with anyone. Doesn't receive support from anyone. He's just a guerrilla kind of warrior on his own, out there, lone wolf. So, those are the 2 different types. And if you're a recipient of the Dev Fund, you're me and you, if you're doxxed, if your real name was used to register for Zcon at any point, then you're on the left side of this. You're Mon Mothma and me, with me at Rebel Alliance HQ. And that means there's compliance we have to do as we build. That's just a fact. As a user, you can hope for a kind of a Saw Gerrera type to emerge, but you can't coordinate with him. You just can't. One lesson to draw: Bitcoin core developers were never charged with conspiracy. If you take the logic of conspiracy to its utmost, you get to absurd things, right? Like building a road, you were conspiracy to commit murder because a murderer used the road, right? But it's about foreseeability, and it's about what you have a collective agreement to do. So Bitcoin core developers never faced liability because they were not directly working with Bitcoin mixer developers. Ethereum Foundation wasn't part of any of the Tornado Cash cases because they never acted in concert with the developers of Tornado Cash. So that's a lesson for us. If someone wants to build a custodial, programmable smart contract of some kind in a world where Zcash is programmable in the future, we can't coordinate with them. I'm really appreciative of Zcash community grants for their work. Appreciative of Jack and ZF, appreciative of ECC. We've been talking variously about, it's a sad world where we have to spend so much time talking about hiring lawyers, but I think we should. I think we will. And I think we'll get some guidance for the community as a whole that'll help everyone feel a little more safe and secure about what we're building and how we're building it. And I'm not suggesting that even the ZSAs gets us into the rogue prosecutor square, because as I understand the current design of ZSAs, it's just like ERC20s on Zcash, which is not in any way reasonably inferred to be an intent to develop something with someone doing something illegal. But I'm just saying one outgrowth of what people might do in the future, one day, if Zcash is programmable and has smart contract features, could be something that seems to mirror the design of Tornado Cash. And if that happens and people decide to do that, we can't be a part of that. So build his Rebel Alliance headquarters and kind of let Saw Gerrera emerge if that wants to emerge, but don't support it, don't help it, don't coordinate with it, don't act in concert with that. We can't stop it. We can't coordinate with it. We can't support it. That's it. That's all I got. Questions? Okay, I see a chat function. Maybe has some questions in it. Okay. Some questions that are specific that might be better off as questions to include to the lawyers that are being that are anticipated to be supported by the Zcash community grants. Grant for this. So I'll leave those there and maybe get in touch with Jason McGee and or Jack or me or whatever to ask those questions, and we'll add those into the communications that go out to attorneys. There's another question about U.S. law as being a kind of a model for other countries. What can we do to anticipate that? So one of the weird things about the Sterlingov case is that it wasn't clear there was any. The government never proved any specific touch points to the United States. Roman Sterlingov was, even if you believe the government's claim that Roman Sterlingov ran Bitcoin Fog, he lived in Sweden. He worked in Sweden. He did everything in Sweden. Bitcoin Fog was, something that could be found on the dark web. The government never found the servers for Bitcoin Fog. They never de-anonymized Bitcoin Fog. So I don't know where the servers are, but presumably they weren't in the United States. But the U.S. government still claimed jurisdiction over this solely because an IRS agent in D.C. accessed Bitcoin Fog, sent a little Bitcoin to Bitcoin Fog, and sent a memo to the chat function associated with the online website that said, "Hey, I just sent you some Bitcoin that I got from selling Molly. Is this a good place to mix the proceeds of illicit activities?" Very kind of a narkish kind of phrasing. And solely from that act by an IRS agent, the government said, "Oh, we have venue in the U.S. to prosecute." So assume U.S. DOJ is the bear in the room globally. They will assert extraterritorial jurisdiction no matter where you are for basically these four actions. These four causes of action: money laundering, conspiracy to commit money laundering, unlicensed money transmitter, conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitter. Going overseas doesn't protect you from that, no matter where you are. That's unfortunate and it's unfair, but that's the reality. I am at my time. I don't see any more questions, so I guess that is all. Unless anyone else, do we have a coordinator or moderator who wants to cut me off? Yeah, I get the thumbs up. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for everything you do. Here's to the builders in Zcash. You're the most important, right? If you watch Star Trek, the captain's the one who always gets the ship in trouble, but the person who saves everything is the engineering team, Mr. Scotty. So thanks to the builders. Thanks to the engineers. Thanks for what you do. It's our job to protect you and support you. Be well, everyone. Privacy is normal.
Hola, ¿qué tal todos? Estamos acá en ZconV en Barcelona. Estoy aquí con Roosevelt y ahora, y de Zcash español y Zcash podcast en español también. Y estamos aquí para hablar y hacer una entrevista por Zcon Sessions en español también. Y cómo están, cómo está el evento, está disfrutándolo.
Miren, estamos contentísimos porque este evento ha sido magnífico. La logística, la comida, las ponencias, el trato ha sido fantástico estar acá. Y bueno, además que es primera vez que estamos en Europa y estamos como disfrutando todo lo que pasa en la ciudad,
En Barcelona también. Sí.
todo lo que la gente hace afuera de las instalaciones, y ha sido muy chévere estar aquí. Y además, como nos han tratado, la gente se sorprende que volamos muchas horas desde Venezuela y nos han tratado súper, súper.
Súper, qué cool.
Además que lo logramos hablar con Ian en español, así que dijimos antes de llegar
Esto va a estar primera entrevista para mí en español y también para ZFAV Club, creo, como de podcast.
Ajá.
Pero sí, estamos hablando en español, si en el Spanglish, entonces si en un momento no nos entendimos, vamos a cambiar a inglés, so it's going to be a little broken, pero vamos a hablar en Spanglish.
Rothman nos va a ayudar con la magia.
Hey, perfecto. Roman, gracias por ayudarnos.
Mencionaste algo importante, Ian. Hablaste de SecHub. Ya cumplió un año.
Sí.
How do you feel? ¿Cómo te sientes?
Para mí, ZconV es como un experiment, ¿me entiendes? Es como una cosa que construimos para crear una nueva forma de recibir Zcash, para trabajar en el ecosistema y para entrar como en comunidad. Y para mí tenemos
Palabra clave, comunidad.
comunidad. Y tenemos este ejemplo de construir comunidades en Zcash que es distinto que las otras formas. Y ahora tenemos información, entonces podemos, ¿cómo se dice? Like, improve it. Like, sí, tenemos un ejemplo y podemos construir más modelos y podemos crearlos y crear más modelos para, ¿cómo se dice? Invitar más personas para, sí, para colaborar con nosotros, para trabajar en el ecosistema. Entonces, en mi opinión, fue un experiment, fue una prueba. Y ahora
Una prueba que salió muy bien.
sí, salió muy bien y ahora tenemos la información y la confianza para darlo más dinero de los grants program, de los block reward y esa cosa para, ¿cómo se dice? Like, grow it.
Para que,
Sí,
para que sea en comunidad. Es impresionante porque por lo menos en Venezuela la gente está muy pendiente de todo lo que está haciendo el SecHub. En Venezuela toda la comunidad siempre está como pendiente de cómo puedo aportar o qué puedo aprender también dentro del SecHub y es fantástico porque muchas veces entramos a comunidades y no sabemos a dónde buscar información. Y en el SecHub está todo.
sí, está todo y ya. También ZconV como, como un sitio de información que es más básico. Y necesitamos los sitios más básicos porque gente nueva no puede entender como todas las cosas de que estamos hablando, como Zero Knowledge Proofs y la tecnología de privacidad, cómo funciona un blockchain. Es muy difícil entender para una persona nueva, entonces necesitamos más sitios más básicos para personas normales.
Todos transitamos por eso que dice Ian, es decir, todos cuando empezamos a entender la tecnología blockchain, pasamos por ahí, por entender lo básico, el concepto, Satoshi Nakamoto,
Sí.
una blockchain, o sea, es inevitable pasar, los Zcashers, los que se unen a Zcash, es inevitable pasar por el SecHub,
Sí,
que es una ruta obligada.
Creo que hay algo
estoy de
interesante
acuerdo con eso.
que esto lo podemos conectar con Zcash, porque la idea también de Zcash es que sea un podcast en español, pero que sea sencillo, que no sea un podcast técnico, porque queríamos decir a la gente, bueno, esta información la puedes consumir sin importar el nivel de conocimiento que tengas dentro de lo que son las criptomonedas, la Web3 o cualquier cosa que esté sucediendo en el ecosistema. Entonces, creo que ahí el SecHub y lo que estamos haciendo también dentro de Zcash tiene bastantes.
Sí, porque eso es una buena idea, porque tenemos podcasts por la persona más técnicos. Entonces, tiene como el Zero Knowledge Podcast con Ana Ross, en donde las personas que quieren saber más de la tecnología en un nivel más advanced y más difícil, más técnico, esta persona puede encontrar ese podcast de Zero Knowledge FM y otros y escuchar estos y podemos tener nuestro podcast para contenido más básico.
Correcto. Cuéntanos, tengo esta curiosidad. ¿Por qué manejas también el español? ¿Que has vivido aquí en Latinoamérica? Bueno, aquí en Latinoamérica. ¿Viviste allá en Latinoamérica un poquito?
Cuando estaba creciendo, yo llevé
Argentina.
No, yo llevé un viaje a Argentina para entrenar como un equipo de fútbol allá.
Ok.
Y empecé aprendiendo español por ese viaje. Y después de eso yo tenía mucha suerte porque yo fui a escuelas internacionales. Yo vi en otros países, como Kuwait, cerca de Saudi Arabia era Kuwait. Y yo fui a una escuela nacional en Inglaterra y yo fui a una universidad por jugar fútbol y soccer en los Estados Unidos. Y yo tenía mucha suerte porque siempre tenía amigos que eran de países hispanos, latinos, en Latinoamérica, España. Entonces siempre tenía la oportunidad para hablar español. Y cuando estaba en colegio, yo jugué en un equipo de soccer con muchos tipos de Argentina. Yo llevé viajes a Argentina. Y después de eso, conocí a mi novia y ella de Puerto Rico y hablamos español en casa. Entonces yo puedo practicar todo el tiempo. Entonces, sí.
algo que me pasó muy curioso, porque bueno, también de esto se tratan estas entrevistas, es que cuando vi a ella la primera vez, lo saludé en inglés, en mi mal inglés, y de una vez me saludó en español, y yo, ¿qué?
Sí, sí, mucha gente no sabe. Yo hice una charla a ZconVoces en Brasil y yo también puedo leer y entender portugués, pero muy difícil para hablar, porque yo no tengo la oportunidad para practicar esa cosa.
Claro.
Y cuando estaba preparando por esa charla, yo fui a hacerlo en portugués, pero cuando estaba como practicando con el grupo, ellos me dijeron, Ian, ¿quieres español? Porque tu español mejor que tu portugués. Y yo lo hice en español, entonces yo hice una charla en ZconVoces, está en YouTube, si quieren verlo. Sí, hice esto en español también.
No, tienes fans. En Venezuela tienes tus fans.
Tengo mi fans, muchas gracias.
Por supuesto, el club de fans. Sí, es
Sí.
correcto, es correcto.
Pero sí, para mí es una bendición para tener la oportunidad de aprender español y ahora paso un montón de tiempo en Puerto Rico, entonces tengo la oportunidad para hablar con mi novia y su familia, su amigo, entonces puedo seguir practicando, pero sí.
Volviendo con el tema del Sec Hub, aunque entiendo que ya tú no estás directamente en el Sec Hub, o sí lo sigues dirigiendo.
No, estoy como si
Ya tu hijo creció, lo dejaste que siga creciendo.
Sí, como... Cuando empecé haciéndolo, pensé que, ok, voy a crear este sitio y esta plataforma para invitar nuevos miembros de la comunidad para creándolo, con el contenido, con todos. Y yo no puedo hacer esto solo, porque yo tenía mi trabajo también en Electric Coin Company. Y yo no tenía tiempo para construir un sitio nuevo con mis responsabilidades de mi trabajo. Y cuando estaba creándolo, yo me pensé, ok, necesito personas nuevas para hacerlo. Y algunos miembros de la comunidad empezaron ayudándome. Y después, como 8 o 9 meses, hice la decisión, ¿cómo se dice? Like, to give it away, para darlo a esa persona. Fue un grupo de 3 personas y ellos recibieron un grant de Zcash Community Grants para pagar por sus servicios y su tiempo.
Claro.
Pero también tenemos el Community Bounty Program. Entonces, ¿por qué? Es un sitio completo, es un resource muy importante en la comunidad de Zcash. Entonces, 3 personas no tienen el tiempo suficiente para hacer todo, entonces necesitamos una comunidad para hacer todos. Y en esa plataforma, ahora tenemos la oportunidad por personas nuevas en la comunidad para contribute, para trabajar en todas las cosas que necesitamos en la comunidad, porque son importantes, como newsletters, podcasts, design por los sitios de web. Y ellos pueden recibir Zcash directamente del block reward. No tienen que comprarlo en Centralized Exchange como en Binance y algo como así. Pueden trabajar y tiene acceso directo del block reward. Para mí es muy importante y ahora mi trabajo y mi role,
¿Tu rol?
mi rol en Zcash, en Zcom, sorry, es para ayudar cuando puedo.
Okay.
Cuando puedo. Puedo hablar con el core team de nuevas ideas,
Un consultor.
El consultor, sí, puede ser. Pero mi sueño para Zcash es para ser una plataforma más de Zcash. Zcash es la fundación, es como la corra, pero puede ser más. Por ejemplo, podemos crear sitios y plataformas como Zcash en otras comunidades, como Namada, como Bonombro, Railgun, Aztec en Ethereum. Y cuando estamos construyendo esas comunidades y esas plataformas, cuando están haciendo los bounty programs y trabajando, Zcash puede estar el dinero de transacciones. Entonces podemos crear nuevos sitios y nuevas formas de educación por otras comunidades y otros ecosistemas, pero en la fundación y en la corra de todo el proyecto, cuando los contributors llegan para hacer trabajo, ellos van a recibir Zcash. Entonces, en ese model, en ese ejemplo, Zcash ya está el dinero de
Sí,
Es una forma de impulsar el uso del SEC, de Zcash, pero también es un tema de descentralización, que se pueda autosustentar, entiendo.
sí.
Creo que también no solamente de sustentabilidad, sino también de oportunidades para otras personas que tienen un talento y lo pueden poner al servicio de la comunidad dentro del Sec Hub. Porque de hecho en Venezuela hablamos mucho de esto y cada vez que alguien ingresa a la comunidad, les recomendamos inmediatamente que vaya al Sec Hub porque va a ser muy sencillo
Sí, sí.
conseguir información y luego si sabes que tienes algún talento, allí probablemente hay una tarea que pueda ser asignada a ti y lo que tú dices puedes recibir SEC a cambio de
Sí.
las tareas que estés ejecutando.
Sí, eso es muy importante porque cuando creé ZconV, yo no tenía ninguna idea que personas de Venezuela fueran a usarlo para contribuir y hacer trabajo para el ecosistema. Yo lo creé solamente fue una idea. Y como the implementación de la idea fue muy distinto que la idea que tenía en mi mente en los años pasados. Pero eso es muy importante porque hicimos como un survey. ¿Cómo se dice survey en español?
Una encuesta.
Sí, hicimos esto y personas de Venezuela lo llenaron y lo contestaron las preguntas que teníamos. Y personas estaban diciéndonos, yo no tengo ninguna manera para comprar Zcash por razones varias. ZconV es la única manera que puedo obtener Zcash. Y para mí, cuando yo leí esto, yo estaba pensando, Dios mío, qué cool ese modelo, que persona nueva de la comunidad, pero recibir ZEC directamente.
Más o menos lo mismo sucedió y sucede con Free2C.
Sí.
Con Free2C también.
De hecho, cuando yo entré en la comunidad, yo sabía que podía generar contenido porque es lo que hago siempre, es mi trabajo.
Sí.
Yo decía, bueno, ¿en qué plataforma puedo empezar a generar contenido? E inmediatamente me dijeron, o vas al Sec Hub o vas a Free2C. Actualmente estoy generando contenido en Free2C y eso, por supuesto, hace que tengas algunas donaciones, puedas tener Sec y puedas vivir la experiencia de no tener que comprarlo. Bueno, porque hay una realidad en Venezuela que es una realidad de cotizar. Entonces, eso es importante también para que la gente entienda que el talento es valorado dentro de las comunidades y es algo que nos gusta como repetirle a las personas que entran a la comunidad. Oye, si estás aquí y tienes un talento, ese talento se va a valorar de alguna manera.
Sí.
Buenísimo. Es una oportunidad.
Sí, también. Y tenemos ahora, en mi opinión, todos son pruebas. Todos son pruebas. Tenemos Free2Z, tenemos ZconV, y ahora tenemos el Zcash Foundation Minor Grants Program, y tenemos más maneras para entrar al ecosistema, contribute y recibir Zcash como en cambio por los servicios, ¿me entiende? Y sí, exactamente. Y ahora necesitamos ver esos modelos y esas pruebas y construir más. Porque es una manera muy buena, muy productiva para descentralizar Zcash, la Development Fund de Zcash y la ecosistema en general. Y si lo descentralizamos, vamos a tener más resilience. ¿Cómo se dice resilience?
Resiliencia.
Resilience del ecosistema. Y para mí es muy importante y estoy aquí en este fin de para hablar de esas cosas.
Qué bueno.
Tengo una pregunta que no quiero que se me olvide. En virtud de lo que estás diciendo, ¿qué le recomiendas a una persona que llega al ecosistema y solamente está viendo, pero no está haciendo? ¿Qué le recomendarías a esa persona que tiene un talento, pero que todavía no se ha animado a hacer algo?
Muy buena pregunta. Necesitamos opiniones distintas en todos los aspects en Zcash. En mi opinión, hay un talento y hay una cosa que todos pueden hacer, ¿entiendes? Nunca tenía la idea para hacer como un pottery class de cómo construir cositas con adobo y algo como así, y así, y enfocado en Zcash. Y Madison tiene esa idea para hacerlo en San Diego. Es una idea bastante rara, nueva, pero sí, funciona. Entonces, cuando enfocamos en descentralizar el ecosistema, todos van a tener grupos en que pueden entrar y hacer
Interés, digamos.
Sí.
cada persona dentro del
Sí,
ecosistema.
y hacer algo, porque todos de nosotros tenemos talentos distintos y cosas que podemos hacer. Por ejemplo, cuando estaba haciendo Zeco por la primera vez, yo no podría hacer como los visual designs y gente en Venezuela, sí, y como Ericsson con sus videos de las noticias. Buena idea, qué buena idea, Zach Willy, qué buena idea para hacer, porque todo está en inglés y todos los tweets están en inglés y gente no puede leer inglés porque no entiende y no hablan. Ok, voy a crear un video explicando que todos están diciendo. Entonces, si vos tenés una idea, lo hagas, hágalo, porque no sabemos si es una buena idea o mala, y después como 4 semanas, 6 semanas, 2, 3 meses de haciéndolo, si tiene como tracción, traction,
Buenos resultados.
buenos resultados, sí, tenés esto de motivación para hacer más y, potentially, tal vez puede recibir un poco de dinero para hacer ese trabajo y esa cosa. Pero no funciona, esto es bien, eso es bien también, porque eso te dice, ok, eso no funciona, que, what else, what other ideas, qué otras ideas tenés? Como necesitamos hacer muchas cosas, tenemos que fallar, tenemos que hacer todas y fallar, y después fallando podemos decirnos, ok, eso no funcionó, pero tengo más ideas para hacer y voy a hacer esto ahora.
Ian acaba de resumir, ahora, ¿estás de acuerdo conmigo? En lo que siempre le decimos a los que llegan nuevos a la comunidad de Zcash, en español, que primero vas a dar y luego vas a recibir. Hay gente que llega y dicen, quiero invertir, ¿cuánto voy a ganar? No, en Zcash primero das, primero apoyas, primero aportas de forma voluntaria. Mira, yo sé editar videos, mira, yo sé hacer páginas web, mira, yo sé hacer meetups. Ok, aporta y después el dinero, como dices tú bien, el dinero después-
Como en criptomonedas tenemos como resistance, en criptomonedas en esas comunidades tiene que ganar como confianza y trust.
Claro, darse a conocer.
Sí,
Saber
y no puede entrar un Discord o algo y decir, quiero hacer el trabajo ahora, págame. Tener que, ¿cómo se dice? Earn. Ganar, tener que ganar la confianza de la comunidad. Y después ganando la confianza, puedes, después ganando la confianza, puedes empezar trabajando y colaborando que de todo, porque tenemos cosas que, necesitamos ayuda. Cuando tengo cosas en mi trabajo que estoy haciendo y no sé si tengo tiempo suficiente para hacer otras cosas. Entonces, si está entrando en la comunidad y quiere apoyarnos, la mejor cosa que puede hacer es hacer cosas sin permisión. Crear contenido, crear designs, crear ciertos sitios nuevos y después creándolo, muéstranos y después mostrándonos, vamos a verlo, vamos a estudiarlo y decir, ok, esa es buena, no esa es buena, y vamos a usar esto y no vamos a usar esto, y después podemos darte como feedback, información en que puedas hacer en la próxima, y también ganas nuestra confianza.
un voto de confianza, ibas a decir.
Que tenemos que empezar a trabajar en las comunidades de manera desinteresada, en ese sentido, porque es lo que comenta Rubén, muchas veces a nosotros nos ha pasado y lo hemos visto dentro de la comunidad, cómo gano dinero aquí. No, es cómo me gano la confianza, cómo creo reputación aquí, y eso es lo que va a hacer que el dinero de alguna manera llegue a través de las tareas y las oportunidades.
Sí,
¿No?
sí.
En muchos espacios en el ecosistema, porque no es solamente el SecHub, hablamos de Free2C, hablamos de algunas otras cosas, los bounties o algunas otras cosas que también te generan algún tipo de ingreso.
Sí, y también, tenemos un supply cap de 21 millones de Zcash.
Ajá.
Y necesitamos crear modelos que podemos ganar dinero sin la ayuda del dev fund y coins y monedas nuevas. Entonces, en un día, cuando gente entra al ecosistema, tienen que crear productos y servicios que queremos, que necesitamos, y si necesitamos, vamos a pagar por esos servicios. Siempre va a estar programas y comunidades, no, siempre va a estar programas para ayudar gente que no tienen que deberían hacer, pero la mejor manera es para llevar sus talentos adentro del ecosistema, hacer hacer que quieras y después de eso ustedes van a ver if it's valuable, si tiene valor o no.
Es correcto, es
Sí.
correcto. Una pregunta cambiando de tema ya para ir terminando. Ian, ¿conoces Venezuela? ¿Has ido a Venezuela? ¿Y cuándo vas a ir o no quieres ir?
¿Puedo ir?
Ok,
Sí.
bueno,
Cerca, porque de Puerto Rico puedes llevar un vuelo a Colombia, después de Colombia a Venezuela.
Fans de Venezuela tienen que escribir para que Ian nos visite allá.
Ian en Venezuela.
Dale, sí, es posible, si quieren hacerlo.
Nada, Ian, gracias por tu tiempo. Es un gusto conocerte y un gusto estar compartiendo aquí en la ZconV.
Gracias, mucho gusto. Gracias por su tiempo también y mucho gusto y un placer para conocerles.
Y nos vamos,
Gracias,
ahora,
gracias
no,
también.
ahora sí nos vamos a tomar la foto con Ian.
Sí, un foto, dale, perfecto. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Again, checking back in from ZconV, recording a few of these interviews just to give the Zcash community an update on various things that people are working on and various ideas in the space. I'm here with Renee Vergara, who has been working on Zigo. And I think we could just use this as like a quick 10 to 15 minute opportunity to share a little bit more about yourself and the things you've been working on. Maybe the best way is an intro and yeah, what's your background, what got you interested in Zcash and obviously building on Zigo.
For me, actually, Zcash was my gateway into crypto. I've always been interested in coding and also working with privacy technology, like more from the user side. And that's kind of how I stumbled into Zcash. And I really, I couldn't believe that there was already the technology to do private payments and that people really didn't know about it and weren't using it. So I got involved in the community. And as part of that, I sort of kind of like kept nagging at me that there was this gap in the ecosystem about being able to pay with Zec in an everyday basis. And at some point, they just decided, like, maybe I try to do something about it. And I made a little prototype, and it kind of worked. And I shared it with a few people, and they thought, yeah, that looks interesting. So I decided to keep going. And the community has been very helpful in providing ideas as to what would be more useful. And that kind of led us also into the direction of trying to integrate with existing applications. So now we kind of have both kind of like a point of sale that you can use on a brick and mortar face-to-face, and also ways to integrate with applications that you can send invoices and get paid in Zec, or you can create e-commerce shops and get paid in Zec directly. So far that has been the main goal, is to implement a way that makes it very easy for a vendor to start accepting Zec, trying to automate and smooth out all the friction that you could be having due to, there's been a lot of conversation about the UX and the wallets and all of that. And we're working to try to remove that friction away from the process of just exchanging for Zec.
Awesome. I think that's super valuable. So, I mean, obviously, it is a bit of a gap because if you go even within this event, and this isn't being critical, it's just like we're on that path towards having this future state, like giving vendors the ability here to be able to accept Zcash so we can go around and spend it here within the conference, I think in a future state would be really cool. Zigo could be potentially the thing that drives that, right?
Yep, definitely. I've been discussing that with Zakpek as well, because he has a similar idea of like bringing together the vendors and bringing together the users, the people that have Zec and are willing to spend it, and creating a tool that helps, makes it easier, reduces the technical curve that people need to start doing it. I think is going to help with that.
No, for sure. So at a high level, just so we can again set the context, Zigo is a application that allows people to implement the ability to create invoices and accept Zcash for payments in physical brick and mortar stores and online e-commerce stores potentially.
Yes.
Does it have its own specific hardware? So if I want to like use Zigo at my coffee shop in X City, do I need to buy a specific hardware, or it can implement, or is the idea to integrate it with current existing point of sale systems?
Well, right now we design it so it's completely hardware agnostic. You can run it on anything that can run a modern web browser. That's part of why we chose to make a web app rather than a particularly iOS app or an Android app, because it kind of like sets us free from those ecosystems of the app stores. If you have a browser, you get to Zego. One of the challenges with integrating with existing point of sale systems is that they all do everything they can to become walled gardens. And that is always going to be a challenge because they want to lock the vendors in. They want them to use the proprietary hardware, the proprietary software, their own payment processor so they can take the fees off of it. And I think that that's always going to be a challenge. And one of the things that I've been thinking of is how can we, so we have Zego as a point of sale, how can we also add potentially some connection to traditional payment rails so the vendor can still have both options, but we do it from our side where we are not a walled garden. If you have a customer that walks in with a credit card, go ahead, serve their customer, but they still have the opportunity to also accept.
100%. So if I'm like a vendor in X store, or I own like a brick and mortar coffee shop, I would have a device that would be on the Zego web browser, creating invoices and accepting Zcash, and I could also have like another point of sale system where I need to accept credit cards and cash or etc.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. I think that's a really good approach because I think people always want to lessen that barrier to having to adopt things, and I think by saying, oh yeah, if you just go on like this X web browser with another device like that, most people have a couple of devices spare that they can use. So I like that approach. What's been the kind of walk me through the process of development? You're currently receiving a grant from the Zcash Community Grants Program.
Yes.
So how long have you been working on that grant? What's been the process of development, and where's Zego at currently today?
So we got our grant approved a little over a year ago. It was late June of last year, and we've worked through most.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Brigner. I'm Vice President of Strategic Alliances at Electric Coin Company. Before that, I was head of U.S. policy and strategic advocacy. It's been about a little over 2 years now, going on 3. This is my 3rd ZCon. Just such a privilege and honor to be a part of this community and to be in a very special role at Electric Coin Company. And also to be one of the speakers today talking about policy and regulatory issues. All of the other speakers, JW, Peter, John, Kurt, they're all amazing and good friends and heroes of mine. So this is a privilege, and I want to thank you for that. Just as an introduction, in addition to working at Electric Coin Company, I do a very, very part-time role teaching fintech for MBAs at Georgetown University. So I keep just a toe in the academic environment as well. And that's part of the strategic advocacy activity, actually, that we might talk about as we go forward. Okay, so I've got a lot to cover here, and I'm going to try to keep it quite high level because if I go too deep, it's just too much, frankly. I'm going to just give you some key takeaways, policy takeaways from the last year since we did ZCon. I think I did a session like this at ZCon last year. So let's go into it. And wow, what a year it has been. And I think that in so many ways, you could say that I'm just getting some questions here. So, okay, all right. Good questions coming through already. Sorry, let's keep them coming, and I'll cover that one in just a minute. So watershed year, yes, it's been an amazing year, I would say, in many ways. And we'll talk about the bad later, but let's focus on the good for just a moment. The Bitcoin ETF approval was just an incredible milestone for the industry. And however you look at that, good or bad, I think that some of us lament that to some degree because it is a sign that Bitcoin is becoming more TradFi and a little bit more captured than I think some of us would like for it to be. But it has just done amazing things for raising the profile of the industry, bringing new investment into the industry, and the fact that the SEC was forced to move that forward is just a huge deal. So overall, a great thing. We've got a lot of bad things behind us too. You know, FTX and other catastrophic failures are in the rearview mirror. A lot of that stuff is being settled. There's a few things that I think are still working their way through bankruptcy proceedings and court proceedings, but a lot of it is behind us. You know, we're getting a lot of the sentencing done for some of those individuals, and you know, it's some of that I kind of hate to see that happen, but it's nice just to get that behind us and move past some of the really bad things that have happened in the industry. Hopefully we don't have more of those. This is a big one. Significant funding has been deployed to support pro-crypto political candidates. And we also have grassroots that are activating. Just this morning, I was reading, I think it's covered in Reuters today, over $100 million is now in super PACs dedicated to placing pro-crypto candidates in certain races. And you've seen organizations like A16Z and Coinbase and others really stand up and put their money into this. And that is a game changer. Whenever it is demonstrated that the crypto industry is important enough and is well-funded enough, has enough backing to put this kind of money into political races, we will see a tide change. And I think that there's already, just because the fact that money is there, even it hasn't had the effect yet, it's changed the dynamics in politics broadly. We have some outstanding congressional crypto champions, and they're pushing a lot of legislation forward. We have so many different bills that have been proposed. Some of them have made quite a bit of progress. I'm not going to go into them all now, but you know, we can thank people like Representative Emmer, Patrick McHenry. We've got Senators Gillibrand and Lummis and many others. And just as important, it's their staff. They have great staff, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation as well. We've also had a lot of offensive court cases initiated, and you know, it's really frustrating that we have to go down this path of having court cases be the ultimate decision in policy making, because that's not actually the way it's, you always want the court there as a backstop, but you'd like the policy to be made and then then take it there, not the way it's been working. I think it's been anyway, we'll talk more about those details later too, but at least we are making progress with good court cases that I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so here's the challenges that remain and the new threats that have emerged. So this one, I guess I just threw them all up there. The administration continues to be anti-crypto, and it's just in a huge way. It's extremely aggressive regulation by enforcement from the SEC. Just this week, we heard about a Wells notice to Robinhood. There's been one to Consensus and Uniswap very recently. And these are notices from the Securities and Exchange Commission to these organizations saying that they are preparing to bring suits against them for improperly trading in securities. And of course, this is talking about their crypto businesses for Robinhood, for example. So yeah, and I think you all know this has been going on for a very long time. One thing that is concerning me greatly is this next bullet with the IRS proposed rule requiring unhosted wallet providers to report. And the bottom line is it's a serious threat to self-custody, because if you're an unhosted wallet and you're having to report all of the activity of your users, you're having to collect a lot of information that you don't need to collect, that you wouldn't collect otherwise, and turning the wallet providers basically into brokers. It's a huge overreach, and of course, all of this is being tested, and that's again in the courts and in other ways through regulatory proceedings. There've been some meaningful efforts to move legislation forward, as I mentioned, but unfortunately they've just largely stalled. They may get out of committee, they may get some votes, but ultimately they don't get quite far enough, and we don't have the enough bipartisan support to move anything. And really what has been the biggest concern that I've watched very closely over the last few months is the global conflicts really have raised the issue of illicit finance like it has never been a focus before. And people like Senator Warren have really latched on to this. And there's been a lot of legislation crafted that would, again, threaten self-custody, threaten privacy, and pretty much, in many ways destroy the industry. So these are things that continue to watch closely. And we also have a lot of defensive court cases, both civil and criminal. The criminal ones have been discussed already today. So these court cases, I'm not going to go through these in detail because there's just so many, but the Blockchain Association does a great job of providing summaries of these cases, and I wanted to make them available to you at a high level here, just in case you wanted to have a reference after this presentation. You can see, these are all cases against the SEC brought by the industry, trying to clarify, for instance, with the Blockchain Association, the dealer rule that was recently finalized. I'm sorry, and the status of ETH as a security with consensus. Just so many issues that are currently being litigated offensively, which is good for our industry. And then against other agencies as well. Coin Center, of course, we had Peter on. They're involved in 2 of these cases there that are listed. And of course, the Treasury Tornado Cash case. But there are cases brought by the SEC, and some of these have been going on for a very long time. And I would love to see a win on some of these. I think that would just be an unbelievable game changer for us. And I think it's possible that we might see some of that coming soon, since these things have been hanging out there for so long. These are the ones that are most concerning for us, and I won't go into them because I think they've already been discussed quite a bit. But the fact that we're having criminal cases around this is just highly concerning. So what is our strategy? What have I been doing in Washington, D.C.? I've been working very hard to forge close relationships with influencers. We have limited resources. We don't have a large team of people like some other projects do, like some of the larger projects or some of the exchanges and other entities working in crypto. So I have to be very scrappy, and I have to do things mostly on my own and do a lot of the grunt work, candidly, to make things happen. But I do a lot of activities that I'll describe in a moment to develop close relationships with Hill staff, with other industry leaders, trade associations, think tanks, advocacy groups, and in universities and academics. And a lot of the activity is around convening meetings and curating discussions. And that is something that I think adds a lot of value, because a lot of people, want to elevate their own voice primarily, and they don't take an approach of elevating others. And by taking a strategy of elevating others and helping the industry in general, we are in the mix in a very important way, in that, you know, we're actually bringing all the people together, and we have a little bit of a role in curating those discussions as well. And then we get a lot of the credit for being the organization that is bringing people together. So when you don't have all of the resources, like some entities, to just come in and, like, you know, directly dominate a discussion, I think a much better way to be important and to be relevant is to just help everyone else elevate their own voices, and then yours is just part of the mix, and then you get respect for doing that. So that's kind of the strategy that I've been following for quite a while now. So here's the stuff that I've been doing specifically. The Pretty Good Policy for Crypto. It's a industry-leading initiative, and it includes a monthly breakfast series. It includes a podcast and special events. Been doing this now since almost the entire time I've been at Electric Coin Company, and it just worked out so nicely. Someone mentioned to me the Pretty Good Privacy breakfast meetings that ECC hosted at events, and suggested that we should do something in DC, and that just sounded brilliant to me. So I really ran with that. And especially the monthly breakfast series has just become something that is kind of pivotal here in DC for the crypto policy community. And I work closely with the Blockchain Association on that. I work closely with Coinbase, as well as we just made a switch. I was working at Georgetown, but now it's University of Southern California, and they have a very active and great blockchain research center there. The podcast series, you know, I actually have backed off of that a little bit this year just because of bandwidth. I think many of you know that, you know, we welcomed a new baby into the family this year, and over the past few months, you know, trying to get through those first few months is quite a struggle. So I want to get back to that. And I think it's a very important initiative. And then we'll talk about the special events, which has primarily been the Global Encryption Day celebration that we've done for the last couple of years. Talked about these partnerships. I just can't tell you how important that they've been. Again, you know, it's taking the lead on something that all of these organizations would like to do, but they have limited bandwidth as well. So they're willing to partner and, you know, let me just take the charge and lead this activity. And I really, honestly, I'm doing every little detail of it, from, you know, the video to the venue to getting the catering. I mean, everything. So it's a lot of work, actually, and it's a ton of work for me to do on a monthly basis. So it keeps me very busy, but it helps me develop very close relationships with these other groups, and that is just priceless. Yeah, so continuously engaging with stakeholders. Obviously, I'm always doing that. Strong social media presence. You know, over the last couple of years, we've published a ton of videos on YouTube, over 80 videos, 10,000 views. On X, Twitter, we have, you know, for the most recent 2 meetings, I've been featuring each of the Pretty Good Policy breakfast speakers in their own separate video and their own posts, so that can be reshared. So I've got just like 5,000 views for the last couple of meetings. LinkedIn, growing presence there. So I'm actually live streaming now the Pretty Good Policy breakfast to all 3 of these platforms. And again, just trying to get, you know, more leadership out there and more take these things to a higher level of profile. I wanted to share with you just a very short video of one of the speakers at a PGP breakfast recently. This is Lizzie Fallon. She is a legislative director for Representative Emmer, Whip Emmer, in the House. And I just loved what she said. I thought it just, to me, it crystallizes why I'm doing the PGP breakfasts, and it highlights people like her who I think are just doing amazing work for the industry. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to play that for you for a couple minutes. It's about 4 minutes, I think. Okay, I understand you can't hear it. don't know why that would be, because I thought that should just work. I can hear it. Any ideas there, Ryan? Or I could just skip it here. Let me see if there's a setting that I can change real quick. No, I don't think so. So I'm gonna just skip that. I'll share a link afterwards. So let me see if I can skip. Okay, I should have tested that. Sorry about that. Okay, so I mentioned Global Encryption Day, and this was just a wonderful event this year. It's in November 21st, I believe, every year, and I'm already planning for the next Global Encryption Day. You can see here we had Whip Emmer again. You know, he's here giving opening remarks for that event. We had an amazing panel. You know, Zuko was on the panel. You can see we had Marta Belcher. We had the chief security officer from Coinbase. We had Henry from MobileCoin, and a professor at Virginia Tech, Eric Berger, to moderate. So just amazing event, and it was at an amazing venue. Like I'm able to, with Whip Emmer's help in his office, able to secure the Congressional Visitor Center, like this huge, beautiful auditorium right there in the Capitol building. It was really special. So hope to do something like that again this year. By the way, of course, all these videos are available, so you should check them out. Here's some examples of the podcast series. Like at ZCon last year, that was a really special one that I really enjoyed. And we had Vitalik on with Zuko talking about privacy pools. That, again, a very special podcast. And also using the podcast to develop relationships with other groups. Like here we have Chris Edwards from Coinbase. He's the head of Coinbase Institute, or was the head of Coinbase Institute. And Nick Carr, who leads Stand with Crypto Alliance. And I'm going to mention Stand with Crypto Alliance in a minute, too. Okay, so what's next? First of all, don't panic. I think that if a normal person would hear some of the things that some of the other speakers and even I've said today, you might get pretty worried, and I would totally understand that. In fact, one of the questions that came through earlier in this chat was, should everyone lawyer up? I'm a lawyer. I don't practice. I'm not here giving any legal advice, just talking about policy issues. But you know, I do have some advice on that front. So let's go through the rest of these bullets. I think we need to continue to execute. Like, I want to continue to execute on the policy front and make sure that I continue to build these relationships and make sure that we're very visible in the policy space. I think that is so important to like forge these alliances. And while you're doing so, you're humanizing our project. You're putting a face and developing relationships directly with our project. It's very difficult to attack something where you can put a face to it, and you know the people, and you know the people are doing things for the right reasons, and that you know, you can't attribute things to them that just aren't true. It's just not as easy to do when you have a real person that's connected with something. So I think that having a presence is just absolutely